live, guys.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hey, us in watching the show at the moment, because that's all it is.
Yeah.
So hopefully more people come filtering through. And if you're watching us in the future on either our Twitch VOD or YouTube, hi. This is the show SideTrack, formerly Trainwreck. But this is now called SideTrack. It's going to be the same exact show. It's the show where we stream pretty much whatever, from RPGs to us talking about stuff to any number of cool ideas that we happen to come up with at any given time. Whatever it is, it'll probably suck. But regardless, it'll be Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Nick Urasiva of Project Derailed. And we're going to be doing a segment we call Discussions in Doodles, where we're going to talk about a thing, and I'm going to do an art at the same time, probably related to that thing. Today's topic is Stranger Things 2. It's been out for a while now, so hopefully you've seen it. I know Tom was just getting done seeing it like this weekend.
Yeah.
I
have those
strap him
fresh
down
hot
to a
takes.
chair. You know,
Yeah.
But anyway, why don't we go around the horn and introduce everybody, and then we can just kind of hop right into things.
All right. My name's Tom. I was co-founder of Project Derailed. I write on extremely rare occasions. I produce the streams we do, and I do a little bit of editing here and there, a little bit of talking stuff through, some event type stuff. I dabble a little bit, but I enjoy doing the streams, and I, like doing stuff when I get a chance to. All right,
cool.
Tanner, go ahead, Tanner.
Next, hi, I'm Tanner Bivens. I'm a content creator for Project Derailed, host of Crit or Miss, and a recent Stranger Things convert. So,
Yeah.
I guess funny story, like, whenever Stranger Things first came out, I made it to, like, episode 4 of season 1 and, like, rage quit and was angry at it and, like, I didn't like it. And, like, I bashed the thing handedly. And then, recently, I was like, well, you know what? Let's give it a go. And I pushed through it, and I guess something happened along the way because I love the show now. And I am extremely happy it exists.
Yeah. We did a whole podcast about how much you hated it.
Yeah, I know.
It was a pretty good podcast.
It was a good podcast.
It is. I have reviewed at this point, I think, over 500 movies, video games, and TV shows with my other website. It is one of the few that exist, like maybe 3 to 4 that I actually regret the score that I gave it. I thoroughly regret it. I definitely feel like I misjudged it, but, here I am. I admit, mea culpa. I love it now.
You like what you like when you like it, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think you have anything to apologize for.
Exactly. I guess that's right.
Nick, I can't tell if right now you're doing, like, if this is the cinematic or if this is the art. Like,
This is yes. No, I'm playing with opacities. Is what I'm doing.
All right, Fiona.
Should we allow Fiona?
Yeah.
Yeah. I am Fiona LF Kelly. I am sorry that I'm very washed out for some reason. My face is upsetting the white balance on my camera.
Stop
And
being so white.
I don't know. I don't, like, the only thing that worked was, like, turning all the lights off and having it look very strange. But I don't know what the problem is. But I write stuff for Project Derailed, and I was one of the co-founders. And we just came back from Florida not that long ago, so I don't know why I'm as pale as I am. But, what can you do?
So what was the character you usually play, like, for, like, princess, like, things, like Meridia?
Oh, Merida from Brave, yeah. Fun fact, in another life, I was a princess at children's parties on weekends. It was a lot of fun. I loved it.
All right, so we should probably kick this discussion off. Actually, we can start off. Oh, that's cool, Nick. Okay, I'm excited. But yeah, to kick this discussion off, I mean, I just watched it. You guys have watched it a little bit a while ago. Oh, Fiona watched it with me.
Yeah.
I don't know. You guys want to kind of go around and talk about our initial impressions watching Stranger Things 2. Also, by the way, anyone watching, this is your spoiler alert. We're gonna spoil
spoilers for Stranger Things 2.
Yeah.
If you couldn't tell from the title of this video, there will in fact be spoilers.
What we title this on Twitch?
Discussion in Doodles, Stranger Things 2.
Okay.
I'm gonna say we should just call it the spoiling.
Yeah. So if you haven't watched it, it's pretty good. You should go watch it. If you are the type of person who likes to be spoiled, which I actually know people who are like that, then I guess keep watching. But if you prefer to watch things unspoiled, then get the fuck out. What are you doing here? Watch the VOD later.
Right. Yeah, and if you guys happen to be watching live, which I'm not sure if anybody is, but if you are, feel free to comment in the chat. This is going to be pretty interactive. We'll be keeping an eye on it. So if you have any questions for us or any cool discussion topics, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah. Right after I tell them to get the fuck out.
Right. That's how it works, right?
Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
Why don't we start with Fiona? So Fiona, what were your initial impressions watching Stranger Things 2?
Actually, for the first episode, I was a little disappointed. I don't know why. I couldn't recreate that feeling watching it a second time with you, Tom, but I just was worried, oh god, this is the season that everyone's just Stranger Things is amazing no matter what. I like that they included a Power Ranger on the cast. I was disappointed that it wasn't my favorite, the Pink Ranger, but I did like that Dacre Montgomery was on it. I thought that everyone was really excellent, actually, and in particular I think that they did Bob really well, which is a type of character that is not done well. Bob is amazing. I really like this season. I really like the changes that they made. I thought that they kept the right things the same. And
that went bad.
What?
Never mind. I'm doing things that didn't work.
He's arting.
I'm arting and it did not work.
Shut up while I'm talking. No, but the kids were all lovely. I've seen a lot of criticism of Max, which I kind of thought about the second time around, and I kind of agreed with some of it, but I still think that she's a pretty cool character. I think because that was the type of person I wanted to be growing up. So I think that I related a lot to her, skateboarding and trying not to care, but caring so very much. And I really wanted to be a better skateboarder. I know that you don't actually see her do any tricks, but she skateboarded a lot, which I feel is what I was as a skateboarder at that age. I can go, and that's about it.
That's fair. Okay.
But yeah. That's it.
Yeah. So Tanner, you mentioned that you're kind of a recent Stranger Things convert. So why don't you kind of walk us through your whole sort of Stranger Things awakening?
Okay, so as I said, and I don't know, the podcast might still be out there if you really want to hear me rant about Stranger Things, but I mean, some of the criticisms are still kind of there, but they're just not as strong. Some of them disappeared.
Okay.
I didn't like it at first. In particular, I rage quit at the end, right whenever they found Will's body, quote unquote, in the first season. Because under my impression, I thought that they had literally killed him, and I was like, why did I just waste a lot of my time? And later, I decided, I was like, all right, listen, I really need to give this thing another go. I got to give it another shot. So I watched it, and I was like, there's going to be things about this that are going to irritate me. Just push through. And I did, and I loved the season. I was like, man, this was awesome. I'm glad I did this. And then season 2 came around, and I was very happy with a lot of the things. I don't think the second season was not better than the first season. I feel like they could have done a bit more. For instance, it felt like they definitely had to there were production notes included in this thing, the buyer's house has to get trashed in some way.
Yeah.
Some crazy
baseball bat. Will has to get fucked over by some supernatural thing, and some has to be removed from the equation slightly. Hopper's got to go John Wayne and everything, which, I mean, that's his character, and I like that for him, but it was like, I could definitely see that there were some things where it was like, you're making this season 2, and the production, like, the producer's coming and says, all right, people like this the first time, you got to have it in this one. But beyond that, I thought the season was really great. I loved it. I'm kind of loving the fact now that, like, they bring in, like, these really, like, likable characters and off them. Like, Barb this year was replaced by Bob.
Yeah.
Except Bob got, I guess, a bigger part.
Yeah, definitely.
Sean Astin did a really good job as Bob.
Oh, yeah, he was great.
Well, what I find funny about that is actually in the Stranger Things after show on Netflix, they were talking about how he just like submitted a audition tape like everybody else. Like they were just like going through audition tapes, and they're like, "Oh shit, it's Samwise."
Yeah.
Well, of course
that sounds like Sean Astin.
Yeah.
And then they said they expanded the role dramatically for him. That the plan was that he was gonna die in like second or third episode or something.
It was in the car with Will when he was giving him that terrible, terrible advice.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be his death.
I want to defend Bob on that one, because if it were anybody except Will,
that would be good advice.
That would have been
that'd be excellent advice.
Yeah. It's terrible advice only because Bob was poorly informed. It was not malicious or dumb. It was just bad.
But I did.
This would have been.
Go ahead. Okay, I was convinced when that happened that Bob was evil. I'm like, he is too supportive. He is giving bad advice in like a weird, like kind of nice way. Like he's totally like CEO of Hawkins Labs, and he's just like the man on the inside. Until he died, I was like, Bob is evil. Until he died, I was like, Bob is evil. And then the second time, I was just like, oh man, I love Bob so much. He's just so nice.
Yeah.
The train. Sorry.
Yeah,
Hawkins Lab. The guy this time, not Brenner, the replacement. It was like Owens. Or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember. He's played by somebody famous. I can't remember who it is. But I like the fact that he actually had a bit of a moral compass compared to like the stereotypically evil Brenner with his white hair and suits.
Yeah.
Like, whenever they were like, hey, we should just sacrifice the kid, and the guy was like, are you all fucking high? What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
I was kind of okay with that. But yeah, overall, I thought the season was really good. I don't know who is complaining about Max, because that doesn't make sense to me. Max was her character. She was played well. I mean, her part was a little, I don't want to say it wasn't extraneous. It was more like the part, what I'm trying to say is that the part could have been expanded more than what was on screen.
Well, it was basically that, like, Max had these very, like, simple, like, personality traits, like, she's a gamer and she rides a skateboard. And then she existed, like, for a while towards the end of the season just to, like, be a love interest and a conflict between Lucas and Dustin. And then also she also became this weird like point of jealousy for 11. So like, and we didn't get to see her develop a ton, which is kind of disappointing. I thought that the actress did a lovely job, and I really liked the idea of the character, but I think it could have been expanded a lot more, and I'm hoping it will be.
I think leave a lot of room for development.
I think the issue was that she sort of like sat in this very classic cool girl stereotype.
Yeah, and she didn't know anything until like the end.
Yeah, and she didn't really do anything either. Like, it wasn't like she had good ideas that like changed things around. Which, I mean, not everyone has to be amazing, but it's like they brought her in, and she feels much more like she's just defined by like the boys and men around her, much more than being like her own person. She feels a little bit more like she's just having like she's just like projected onto by her like evil stepbrother and Lucas and Dustin, and like she doesn't really feel like her own person.
And that's what the criticism was, basically, which I think is fair. I still like the character, but I think that that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, I was about to say, that would be my criticism, too, with the character, is, like, for a character, she seems superfluous to a lot of things, and her role was only defined on how she reacts to the other characters.
Yeah.
I still thought that she was a good... I think there's a lot of, like, character development that could come from her. I like her as a character. Like, I like that she's there, and I like what she brings to the show. Her brother, I'm sorry, like, he did an okay job, but I love the fact that he is supposed to be, 16? And the actor
17,
the actor is clearly, like, my age.
Yeah.
The actor is in his mid to late 20s. And you can tell. Like, at least John...
That's not, like, terribly unusual.
Yeah.
No, but I noticed a lot more... Like, whenever it's really noticeable like that, like, I don't mind, like, Michael Cera can play a teenager now, and he's in his, like, 30s.
Uh-huh.
Right.
But, like, the guy, like, it was the same thing, like, whenever...
He's not that old. He's only 22, Baker Montgomery. That's not that old.
Yeah, he looks my age, though, which is, like, you have to at least make sure
he looks like he came ready to fuck. That's what he looks like.
Well, they could have it, they could have him too young and then, like, seduce Mrs. Wheeler. So.
Which, that was an amazing scene. That was
an amazing scene.
Because he just shows up and he's like, I'm hot.
We have a comment.
Oh, great, Mrs. Wheeler's also a pedophile.
Yeah, we have a comment from the chat from someone that we know, actually. Major issue with her. Zoomer isn't a class. Doesn't fit into the party. That was also a little bit.
That's fair.
That was, like, weird and cool that they, like, made up a class.
Well, it was like she didn't know the D&D references, so she just, like, made up whatever she thought like worked. Because, I mean, I guess from her perspective, it just seemed like they were making stuff up. You know what I mean?
Fair.
So, like, I was almost waiting for that to come to a close with them, like, welcoming her into the party and giving her an actual class, like saying, "Oh, you're a thief," or "You're whatever," something that would, like, work. Is one of them the thief in the party?
Don't think
I don't think so, but I kind of like her being the Zoomer. I think that adds something to, like. Yeah. It doesn't and it does is weird. Like, you can take it both ways. Or, like, if she really owned it and they really made it a thing, then she's like a trailblazer. She's just like making her own space, or it's just like she doesn't know anything.
Yeah. That's what I was kind of like hoping it would be. Like, at the end, like, Will would, like, show up and he's like homebrewed a Zoomer class for her to play in their game.
I've seen a lot of that have actually homebrewed some Zoomers, and it's basically just a I guess, like, magical skateboarding artificer.
I like it.
I mean, that's pretty badass. But no, I mean, like it felt like that was kind of dropped a little bit, and it did make her sort of feel like odd person out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that would be like, I don't know, that would have been like a cool. They should have put me in the writers' room, because I've been like, no, like, Will homebrews the class. She sits down at the table and plays with them, and plays the Zoomer. And
well,
that's
Mike is the dungeon master.
I meant Mike. Names are hard. You're right, Mike.
All these little children look the same.
They do. They're all kids. I'm not.
I love the kids.
Sidetrack this conversation, but I'm looking at.
I see what you did there.
There's a Doge in, like, the bottom right corner of my image. Is that intentional or otherwise?
That is intentional.
There's a what in the bottom right corner?
Yeah, it's covering up Tom's face. You were in the last one, but Tom's face is there, like, when we pull over from Skype. Which
I actually don't think it is right now, because I turned that off because I was having CPU issues.
Well, Doug just needs to make an appearance.
Yeah, I just like it now. Yeah, there's nothing behind it. It's just Doug. I can put it on my face. Doug is on my face now.
Good. Keep it like that.
Wow.
So
it's just gonna stay there. It's fine.
To ask another question, because another major part of this was we learned a lot about Elle's backstory, which is one of my favorite parts.
Yeah.
So what do you think about Elle's entire backstory reveal, plus to go into an extension of that, or Kali, the Kali character, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
her party of like Shadowrun gang members?
Yeah. So I I thought it was weird. I thought it was strange that if I recall correctly, they opened the season on
Yeah.
like that party, and
Yeah.
then other than that,
Mhm.
they're in like one episode.
It was the cold open of the show.
Yeah, they
Just
did
suddenly
they did a cold
Pittsburgh.
open, and then like had one episode that was like about them, and that was it, I think.
Mhm.
And I was really kind of expecting that they would play a bigger role, like they would like need Kali to like close the gate or something, or like distract the shadow monster, whatever, the mind flayer, I guess, like mess with its head. Like I kind of was expecting something like that, but
That makes
maybe. But it does sound like with this season, they're much more interested in building up future seasons.
Yeah.
So that might have just
Well,
been a little
now-
bit of lore building.
They
Hmm?
did a lot of world building.
So
Yeah.
now we know they're going to get more seasons,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
you can start building.
that's actually a good
Yeah, well-
segue. Sorry,
Go ahead, Tom.
I was gonna say that's a good segue to something that I kind of wanted to talk about as like my sort of like initial impression, which was how much it felt like a sequel. That was like my like immediate takeaway. Because it's interesting to me they didn't brand it as like Stranger Things season 2. They branded it as Stranger Things 2, and they have like a big 2 in the opening sequence. It's like this is a sequel. And it really felt like a sequel, especially like it felt like an homage to like older sequels almost, where it's like that thing where it's kind of like the same movie and like its overall beats, but then they like change pieces of it around, but like structurally it was interesting that they didn't really attempt to, in my opinion, like take the show somewhere really different. They kind of created the same arc and then like did a little bit of like replaced and like added like one new character and like up the stakes. And
Well,
but
what's
it-
actually really interesting about that is, like, and they actually borrowed from, like, in Stranger Things too, like, they're constantly borrowing from, like, 80s pop culture.
Mhm.
And even in the sense that this was a sequel,
Yeah.
they did a lot of stereotypical 80s sequel things.
Yeah.
Like, the biggest example in my mind is, like, okay, we're going from our first movie where there was one big scary monster to the next movie where there's a bunch of smaller, lots of scary monsters.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of reminiscent of
Yeah.
like Alien to like Aliens.
Mm.
Yeah.
And even a little bit, even in the design of the Demodogs, reminded me of the Alien in the Alien 3
Okay.
movie that we
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah.
mention again from this point forward.
I
But-
definitely.
Yeah. But then also just like the idea of like adding like a deeper, darker villain, like felt very like sequel-y. I
Yeah.
also felt that the show dropped a lot of its creepiness, in my opinion. I thought that season 2 was like a lot less creepy than season 1.
Mhm.
I guess to continue on with the aliens analogy,
Yeah.
it went from horror to like action.
Yeah, that's a really good
Mhm.
way to put it. And there's still
Which is-
clearly
yeah.
like those elements, but I mean, just for example, like the ending of like the shadow demon lurking over the school
Mhm.
was a good ending, but it didn't hit anywhere near as hard as Will coughing off the slugs into the sink.
Right, yeah.
Like, because Will coughing off the slugs felt just like that just like killed me a little bit inside. Like how, like, oh man, like this doesn't end.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And
Made you feel.
I'm sorry.
It said it made you feel uneasy, like there was
Yeah.
an easy.
It made me feel like almost hopeless.
Mhm.
Like it was a really powerful
I like-
feeling.
I like to think that all the Demodogs were just Will coughing up things and then like putting them into garbage cans and sinks and stuff,
Yeah,
and then just spirals out of control.
Yeah, that's what happened in the
that's-
entirety between season 1 and season 2. It's just like every other day, Will coughs up a slug, and it even.
Yeah, that's
And
amazing
that
headcanon.
turns
That is my
into dark,
headcanon
yeah.
now. That's amazing.
Also,
My headcanon is also that they got so big and they raised so many because all the little Dustins in the town found them and then like fed them and raised them.
on Three Musketeer bars.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
a lot of like Dart theories that are just so dumb, but I love Dart so much
I was
because
actually
Dart is exactly what I would do in that situation. I'm sorry, I know it's dumb.
You would get us
I would have
all
done the same
killed.
thing.
There's
Yeah.
a nature versus nurture to Dart that's very interesting because the entire show goes on the premise that these all are a hive mind to the Mind Flayer and that they all are connected somehow to the Mind Flayer. But Dart still does not attack them, which goes into a whole lot of like nature versus nurture aspects and also how much autonomy these Demodogs actually possess. And
Does
Demogorgon.
this unit have a soul?
It's true though, because like you're sitting there thinking like these are just like various parts of the Mind Flayer that they're
Yeah.
minions to be controlled, but clearly Dart has at least enough
Like a little bit, yeah.
enough of a
He
sense
has like
that,
memories at least.
yeah, that he's not going to attack the person that raised him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting because then it goes into just how much autonomy do these creatures have? Like, is it going to be? I'm trying to think. I can't think of the movie right now, but like where they want to like not attack, but if the Mind Flayer pushes hard enough, it forces them to attack or something like that. Either way, it's
Yeah.
interesting to think about.
I was actually wondering wondering if we were going to see like the revelation of like after all the demodogs are like killed and there's only one left and they just find the malted skin and it like the final phase into a fully grown Demogorgon from the first series. I would have liked to see that kind of like closure and confirmation that is in fact like the life cycle of these things. But we never really got it. So it kind of leaves it up in the air of like, are these like a slightly different variant or is this just like the middle like part of its like natural lifestyle or life cycle?
It almost seems like it would have had to change its anatomy, which I know that like being like a polywog or whatever, it starts to like sprout limbs, but it goes from going on four legs to being like totally upright, which made me think that they were different creatures, you know?
That's kind of the impression I got.
Because the Demogorgon had a very human anatomy, and these ones were like clearly dogs.
Well, they just had bipedal anatomy. Like I like the way that the progression of the creature's evolution on the show. I didn't think it was that big of a leap to go from the Demodog form into the final like full bipedal Demogorgon. But I just kind of wanted to see it because it would have made, in my mind, it would have made the world building make like a cohesive sense to it. Where it's like, oh, there's not just a bunch of variants of these things. This is just the life cycle of this creature, which kind of is like the one thing that the show's continually having me want more of, and that is world building on what is the Upside Down and how does it work? Like that's what I want to know, and like how 11 is related to that. Like, does she get her powers from the Upside Down, or was it just that her powers ripped a hole into this dimension? And they're just kind of two coincidental, simultaneous phenomenons.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And how does this world like interact with the Upside Down is my other big question too, because like clearly the structures here affect the structures in the Upside Down.
Right.
So I'm always like, how does that work?
So I want to know, like the theory that I had for a while that I don't think is the case anymore, but for a good chunk of season 2 I thought might be what was going on.
It's like back in time or like forward in time or something.
No, it's that the Upside Down was entirely manifested by 11.
Ooh.
Oh, that's interesting.
That it was because of all the hurt done that she sort of like the only way she could deal with it was by like taking it away from herself and turning it into like another place. And that basically, in that sort of thinking, the Upside Down didn't exist until 11 opened the gate. That led to like a lot of weirdness.
That's really interesting.
I think that's what's going on because it just doesn't quite fit. But stuff like Kali was her name, right?
Yeah,
Kali.
Okay.
Kali, Cal. Oh, by the way, just a real quick side quest on that. 11 is L and Kali is Cal to make Kal-El, which is Superman. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but fuck them if it is.
All right. So, wait, is it Callie or Kali?
Kali.
Kali.
Okay.
Because she's Indian.
Got it. So Kali, because she said there's like this festering wound inside of you, and that was like a metaphor that we got back a couple times. I was like kind of thinking like the whole Upside Down was the festering wound inside of her.
That's a really interesting. That's a fascinating idea.
Like I don't think the ending of the season really backs it up because she does steal it, and it's still there, and she seems okayer now than she was. But I don't want to rule it out.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes to the post that I wrote for our website that everyone should look up right now, about how Stranger Things, like many horror shows, which I've also written a post about, which you can find, I forget what that one's called, though. Like a lot of horror, it's a metaphor for, like, the turmoil that people go through and kind of like being trapped inside your own head. But it handles it in a much better way than a lot of, horror things do. Like, if we compare the recent movie Split to Stranger Things, both have, like, magical solutions for the things that are happening. But Stranger Things really legitimizes it, where Split is just like, nope, it's totally magic and imaginary, and, like, this gives you superpowers, but also you're evil. And, like, you're dirty and horrible. And Stranger Things is like, life is complicated and you have to make complicated decisions, and sometimes your past informs that, but that doesn't make, like, what you're going through any less legitimate.
Fair. Nick, we haven't given you, like, an official moment of your, like, initial thoughts on Stranger Things 2.
I was just gonna let it roll. No, I actually really enjoyed Stranger Things. It took everything I liked about the first season, and it managed to hit all those same beats in a way that was different than what I was expecting, really. And I really wasn't expecting really anything specific. I remember when I finished watching season 2, I tweeted out that I feel the same way I felt at finishing season 1. Just this impressed amazement and a lingering anxiety of how is the show gonna ever continue and top itself, so that's a compliment. It's because it's they did it in season 2. From season 1 to season 2, they managed to expand upon the mythos, expand the narrative in a way that works, makes sense, and keeps up the tension. So I'm confident that they'll continue to do it, but it can't help but it's holy shit, what the fuck are they gonna do now?
Yeah. I think that the kind of making the shadow monster, I don't think that they're going to get bigger than the shadow monster. No. I think that the shadow monster is the thing.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good decision to put that so early on, they found one thing and now here's what they're really dealing with. But along the way, there are these other adventures. They introduced Voldemort in the first Harry Potter book and he was the big bad. Yeah, so you can do it. It is possible, but I think that it's worse almost when you ramp up forever and then it's season 3, actually it's not the shadow monster, it's the mega shadow monster,
And of course they might still do that, but I think you're right. They seem to be setting up the shadow monster as this is the guy.
The recurring villain.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that makes sense for them because it's they wrote the first season as a self-contained narrative, and then Netflix goes to them at the end. I'm like, okay, now what? And they're like, well, Will is still having problems, and they just went on from there. So now that they know that this is going to be more than just what they're working on at the moment, they can have the luxury of setting up those grand moments instead of just like the open-ended cliffhanger Will coughing up a slug, which honestly you could leave it if there was never another season of Stranger Things. That totally works. Now, but the problem is like with season 2, if there was never a season 3 of Stranger Things, which there will be, but if there's never a season 3 to Stranger Things, the ending would be much less satisfying because it's a more direct hint at something larger that will likely become a problem. Like the sinister looming over the school, like this is not over. This is not over on a grand scale. So it'd be a lot more dissatisfying if there was never a conclusion to that. So they can afford to take that risk because they know there will be. They will be able to expand upon that and continue the story forward.
So I want to talk about like my sense of it feeling less creepy, and you guys might disagree with this, but I noticed I haven't watched all of the after show episodes.
Neither have I.
I've watched a few of them.
I watched them all because I love that stuff.
Yeah, it was really good. I just haven't had a chance. But when I was watching, they specifically called out like Lovecraftian horror, talking about how they like had this new like bigger villain, but they still wanted to keep him a little bit inscrutable. And I personally think that they sort of failed on that.
Oh yeah,
not like in a like this is a catastrophe sort of way, but just I feel like the shadow monster, the mind flayer, whatever, its motives feel to me very human. Like it wants to take over this dimension. That's the type of thing like humans do, is take stuff over because fuck you, I can. Like it's not like a good motivation, but it feels very understandable and human. It feels it's almost like it's such a simple human motivation. You can imagine like a child having that kind of motivation, right?
To kind of at least defend it a little bit with the Lovecraftian horror is I love the fact that the Mind Flayer, to me at least, did not feel like a biggest, baddest, only enemy. Like it felt like it's just part of this giant universe. So it's similar to like if we're going into Lovecraftian horror, like a star vampire or something, where it's just a creature in this world that's insanely powerful compared to our standards, but if we keep going through the Upside Down, we actually find the Cthulhus of this world that really don't give a rat's ass unless they're bored or whatever their motivations may be. So what I'd actually like to see in future seasons, myself personally, is like I feel like it can go one of two ways, where the Mind Flayer is, as you say, Tom, this singled entity that has these very human characteristics of taking over the other world, which if that's the case, then I'm 100% on board with you, Tom, that feels a little funky. But the next season I'd like to see is like they go to the Upside Down or something and find out that there's thousands of Mind Flayers. They're just creatures in this world, similar to a Demogorgon.
That almost feels to me like falling into the trap of like having to always just get
one up yourself,
bigger and bigger, and like last season, like one Demogorgon, now it's like one Mind Flayer and 100 Demogorgons.
Yeah,
and like next season would be like one Turbo Mind Flayer or an Aboleth or something, and like 100 Shadow Demons and 1 billion Demogorgons. Although if they do an Aboleth, they have my full support, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Not to say that all of these Mind Flayers have to be nefarious and ready to take over the other world. They're just creatures in this world, and this one got extremely pissy because the other world exists.
Yeah.
But I was thinking is like you go to the Upside Down and you see that has its own ecosystem, I guess would be the term.
Well, they've kind of hinted at that.
Yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
Mind Flayers are just a creature in this world, and like this one just happened to get up his own ass about the other world, while the other ones are just like, fuck it.
So, to go off, to backtrack a little bit, I think that when they were talking about like this Lovecraftian monster, I think that how I interpreted it was not like literally that the season was Lovecraftian, but that the monster was like, this creature that couldn't really be understood because we don't fully understand the place where it's from.
That's fair.
And I think that you can make the argument about its motivation seeming very human. But I thought that the season was more inspired by like horror comedies. So you have like
Yeah.
the big Ghostbusters reference, obviously, and you kind of get more into horror comedies in like the mid to late 80s, or even just comedies in general. Like that very 80s style of comedy that I saw a lot of inspiration from, you know, in this season. Like, I don't know when, like, you know, Adventures in Babysitting and stuff came out, but that's especially with Steve, who I hated, but now I love.
I think that's
Clearly
everybody's
was like the
opinion.
comedy setup duo, which was like the weirdest combination, Steve and Dustin, but they were just
It worked.
so delightful.
So, actually, Tanner, I have a question for you.
Sure.
When we talked to you about last season, Steve was like the scum of the earth.
Yeah.
As
Yep.
far as you were concerned,
You
how do you
hated
feel about
Steve.
Steve now?
1 second. I'm so fucking pissed that I like him now.
I love Steve.
I am so pissed off. Because
Duffer Brothers, no.
here's the thing about Steve, because the first season still irritates me with Steve, because it's the argument that people always make with television shows, where it's like, oh, if you give Steve 8 episodes, he's eventually going to be awesome and cool. And my response is, yeah, I still have to sit through 8 hours of this guy being a prick.
Yeah.
In fairness,
Like-
you're not supposed to like Steve in season 1. I
Yeah,
don't
Steve
think.
was meant to be a human villain, and then like
Yeah.
it just didn't work. Like I think that like Steve really redeemed himself as the season. Well, he didn't redeem himself, but he like got better as the season went on. And then in this one, they just totally abandoned that and made another human villain that they didn't even try to redeem. They tried to explain it a little bit, but there was no redemption for Billy, other
was just an
than
ass.
you know trying to save Zordon in Power Rangers, which is an excellent movie. I don't care what anyone says, and I think that was like a good move. So we have Steve, who has this like totally strange combination, but he's like this like strong single mom who like kind of swears at these kids sometimes. Is just the best babysitter ever.
No, he's a pretty shitty babysitter.
No, he is like he saved those kids from these monsters. I don't know how many babysitters would risk their lives. Like Steve may not make you a very good sandwich, but you know he'll keep you alive.
Will he? He's like he eventually was just like, you know what? This plan to draw all the Demogorgons to our location is a solid one. Let's do that.
He was concussed. I don't blame him for that because he was concussed.
I don't blame him, but I feel like you have to like take it into account. Like
he
that was a
concussed. I
bad
forgive it
idea.
because he was concussed. He was not going to let them do it until he got concussed. That's a pretty strong argument
And I
for
mean,
why
when he
Steve.
wakes up in a speeding car driven by
Yeah,
an
being
8-year-old.
driven by like
Fair.
with a
That
concussion
was a
and like
hilarious scene. I love that.
Oh,
One
yeah.
of my
That was a good
slight
scene.
criticisms of season 2 is that there are several moments that characters do things. Well, like it fits the plot because they put it in there, but like they have to have Steve do something, and they're like, "All right, what do we have? We need to have Steve do something." Okay, he's now the mom to the kids,
Yeah.
and like they have to go and distract all the Demodogs.
Which was
Like-
pretty badass. That was a cool,
It was
Yeah.
cool
badass,
decision.
Superfluous, like
Yeah.
it was like,
I'm glad they
It was-
did it, but does not win Steve the babysitter award.
yeah.
Tom, I'd like to see you make better decisions when you're concussed. And
I wouldn't get concussed.
and in a speeding car with underage drivers.
And also, I'm not a good babysitter. Never claimed to be. Also, I would not get
Steve
concussed.
is you know what Steve is doing? He's doing his best. Tom, go shove it.
But no, Steve really, like, he went from a character I detested.
Mhm.
At the end of the first part of Stranger Things, I was like, okay, there's still a human being here, and I get it.
Yeah.
And then with the second season, I'm just like, man, I like him.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, he's really come full circle. He has had a full redemption arc, and I like it. And I also like the fact that Billy is kind of there more for Steve's benefit than the plot. Of like, we got to make sure that like Steve is still much more relatable to this much bigger bastard.
Yeah. I will also say that Steve
Yeah.
is a character who, like, wouldn't work if he wasn't a teenager.
Yeah.
Which is always interesting. Because, like, I feel like an adult just can't, especially, like, these days with, like, all the different, like, with, I think, like, a growing understanding of how, like, harmful bullying can be and how harmful, like, you know, harassment, assault, that kind of thing. Like I feel like, especially if he was an adult, like, that character just doesn't work. Like the redemption just doesn't work. But, like, it is a fact worth remembering sometimes. Like, teenagers' brains aren't really there. They don't work right.
Yeah.
And, like, that's...
And they also...
No, go ahead.
And they also did get rid of those, like, two friends who kind of seemed like they were encouraging it. Like, they're, nowhere this season.
Yeah.
So I think that they kind of, like...
It was very briefly, yeah.
Where were they?
I don't remember seeing the girl of that group, but the guy was in
The
the
guy
shower
was
scene.
in the shower, you're right. I didn't realize that was him. Yeah, I didn't get that. He was, like, a dick to Steve, too, so maybe there's just, you know, I don't know. Like, he was just around shitty people and did shitty things.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. And you know what? That's actually, like, a pretty, like, solid trope that is, like, or not even a trope, that's, like, that's just a thing.
Just a reality.
Yeah, that just is a thing that happens, yeah. Which it makes sense. And then the minute you remove Steve from that situation, he immediately becomes likable.
Yeah.
Like, you see why Nancy liked him. And, like, it was kind of like in the first season a little bit because it was, like, you know, Steve was, like, so cool. But then, like, it made Steve, like, oh, okay, I see why people, like, hang around Steve. Because he's, like, kind of a cool guy and, like, he's like brave and he, like, is willing to help people. Mm-hmm. So, like, why Nancy chooses to stay with him, I guess, after she's had her arc of being, you know, like a badass, essentially.
Yeah. I felt like Nancy came across weird this season.
On the subject of Nancy, I actually love Nancy this season. Okay. Like, I don't know why people really have a big dislike for her. I think that she's really came into her own as a character. Like, she clearly had, like, human emotions, and she went through great extremes to be able to, like, do everything that she did. Like,
okay,
I don't know, I liked her. I didn't see any flaws.
That's fair. I thought that, like, Nancy, like, I think, like, her breaking up with Steve, probably a solid idea. Her getting together with Jonathan, questionable.
Okay, I want to defend this. I do.
Okay.
Now, hold on. And I'm not to say, because I hear a lot of the argument of people like Jonathan and Nancy should not be together, and I think that you're right. However, it is understandable why they did.
Understandable, yeah, sure.
Yeah, but it's
as explained by the creepy guy with the vodka in the scene, in the show.
Murray? Man, let's talk about, if you want a bad babysitter, let's talk about Murray.
That's fair. He's like, you could sleep separately, but, I mean, go ahead and fuck already. That was basically...
Yeah,
okay,
that was
go
weird.
Ahead.
He's like, okay, underage children, here's a bed and here's some vodka. Let's roll those dice.
Right.
Oh, by the way, Jonathan, how was the pullout?
Yeah.
That needed a fucking rim shot of just how was the pullout.
Yeah.
But to defend this is that Nancy and Jonathan are two people that went through several traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
And that creates a whole lot of weird emotions.
I'm sure it does.
This does not irritate me because in reality, like, if it lasts through season 3, I'm going to be pissed. But, like, this is one of the things where, like, they fuck 4 times for 2 months, and then they realize they have nothing in common as far as compatible love interests, and they're like, maybe we shouldn't do this.
That's fair. That's fair. It could just be, yeah.
I, like, hope it doesn't go beyond, like, a high school thing. Like, I hope that we don't see, you know, Nancy in college and, like, she and Jonathan went to the same college and they get married. I think, isn't that Murray's argument, too, that it's shared trauma?
I'm sorry, what was that, Fiona? I didn't hear you.
Isn't that like Murray's argument that it's
Yeah.
shared trauma?
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I
Shared
was
trauma.
saying.
That's
Like,
that
he
is their
breaks it
only
down.
cohesive bond. And
Okay,
whenever
can I
that's
just throw it out there? That's a bad reason to fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's understandable why it happens, which I'm like, as long as this relationship ends in season 3, I'm fine.
Okay.
Like, but if it goes on, as Fiona says, like they go to college together and they get married, that shit don't happen. That
Like,
would
that
be
works.
believable to fairy tale.
Right.
I mean,
that
that's
works
the thing
for
is that
like
shit
Corey
does
and
happen.
Topanga and no one else.
Yeah. The thing is that shit does happen, and then people get divorced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to
Also-
say that everyone who marries high school sweethearts gets divorced.
But speaking of divorce, though, let's talk about the Wheeler family. And how the worst fucking character is. I love to hate the Wheeler's dad because they do everything to make you hate this dude just because he's such a worthless individual.
Well, that's kind of the thing with the dad. Like, you see this whole kind of interesting unspoken plot there where like the mom is clearly not happy and she's much younger than the dad, and they have these like, you know, couple kids together, and I think it is supposed to be like in world he is much older. I don't know if it's just like the actors are supposed to be the same age.
That's a little
and then
how
they
I
have
read it.
yeah, and then you know they're like they got these like, you know, Bush Reagan signs in their yard, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was.
But-
I was like, that made so much fucking sense.
Yeah.
yeah, and so I think that is like what's kind of interesting about the Whalers. Like we get, well, this season is the first time we really get any of the other families besides like Joyce just being a much better parent than anyone else, and also being very poor and like having her house destroyed all the time. But like even with like their punishments and stuff, they like just do not care. Like these people cannot be bothered, and I know that in the after show they said like that's a very 80s thing, is that like you know, the parents would just go, but I think it's like so much deeper than that. Like they're having like Will is clearly struggling here in this season, and they just keep punishing him. Like I don't think that they ever ask
Mike?
Shit. Mike. Yeah, whoever. I don't know. These
I
people
started that
like,
fuck up train.
but but Mike, like, you know, he's clearly struggling so much, and the parents know what happened. They know some version of it, and they never try to get him help, like on any level. Like, you know, he starts doing really poorly in school, and he starts like disobeying them and like doing things Nancy and like becoming very reclusive, and they just are like, give away all your toys because you skipped class or whatever the punishment was. I don't know, but
it took like what
It's just
2
so
bucks
odd.
out of Nancy's jar, and it was like, if you were on my team, son, you'd be off the team or whatever.
You'd be on.
I'm just like, you're such a worthless individual. Like, you're the worst kind of abuser, the one that can legally get away.
Yeah, and then you see like Joyce. And she, despite having a lot fewer resources and a lot less time and like losing her job over her children last season, she's taking Will to therapy. She's trying to figure out what's going on. She's like being very open with him, and he's responding to that by being very open with her.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's trying to like find solutions.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting to see, like, they take like the sort of nuclear families we see and kind of portray them in this, not like deeply negative, but kind of not great light. Yeah. But then we get like, do we ever see? Is Dustin's father in the picture?
I don't think that they have said anything about his father.
Because Dustin's mom seems pretty cool.
She seems like very supportive. Like she tries.
Yeah,
like,
she seems like a little bit out of the loop, and Dustin obviously kind of likes it that way.
Keeps her out of the loop, yeah.
But like, she seems pretty nice. But yeah, like the Wheelers seem kind of off. Obviously, like, I don't remember Max's last name, but her family is obviously super weird.
Very dysfunctional, yeah.
Yeah. So like we see like these traditional nuclear
Big deal.
families kind of not
But
working out
they're-
so well.
Well, they're also not a nuclear family. They come from divorce. They're both
That's
from
true.
different
They're like
parents.
trying to be a nuclear family.
Yeah. They're going somewhere else to be a nuclear family, and
Yeah.
the children are rejecting that.
Yeah, and they're like really trying to force it.
Right.
Whereas on the other hand, we see Joyce kind of like she clearly like values that nuclear family sort of idea,
Mm-hmm.
but like I don't know, maybe she just has better taste in guys. Like maybe it's really just
Yeah.
that story. But it also kind of feels like Bob isn't like pushing himself in more than he ought to be. I mean, we see, you know, Bob doing stuff like, you know, asking if he's overstepping, you know, checking in to make sure that he's like okay, like really respecting Joyce in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's what makes Bob pretty excellent. Like, he
Yeah.
knows that the kids are, like, part of the package, and he's,
Yeah.
like, easing into it. You know, he's doing what he can to be supportive to Joyce
Yeah.
and her children.
Yeah. Plus,
And
he's
that
kind
was
of
just
like
great.
this, like chubby, like kind of boring guy who ends up saving everyone with the power of code and then dying heroically, which
Bob
I
newbie
would not say he
superhero.
died. He died
basically all I
heroically,
ever wanted in life.
but he
Yeah.
died because he decided to stop moving.
He was dead anyway.
He made it to the fucking door, stopped, and was like,
He
"Hey,
was like
how's it
20
going?"
feet away from
Yeah,
the door. Like, he maybe could have
was
gotten there.
fucking
He
dead.
was winded.
Fun.
He was out of breath.
Yeah, he was fucking
He
dead.
could have at least made it far enough that Hopper could have maybe gotten a shot off.
Frankly,
Like,
Hopper
I
was
don't
outside.
think
Hopper
that-
came back inside.
actually, I actually have like slight issues with that scene because this is something the show did a couple times where it seemed like the Demogorgons were kind of like these unstoppable death machines right up until they aren't.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like it's sort of like, well, I don't know. It's like Hopper like took like extra points and shoot people when he was creating his character, so like his gun does more damage or something. Because it's like they have this whole lab full of armed guards, and they just get sliced through like they aren't even there. And then like fucking Hopper brings out his rifle and just like pops a bunch of them in like the final gate closing scene.
Mhm. Yeah, no, he had only so many uses of that ability per day, so he was saving them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't know, like
Speed.
like it felt like the ability of the Demogorgons to just like soak bullets and do whatever they want was just like very
Well, with
undefined.
Hopper there, I'll give it to them that he was like keeping them at bay. He wasn't necessarily killing them.
No,
Yeah,
he
which,
wasn't killing
like,
them.
when you're
dropping
in
out
a
of the
huge
scene.
tunnel is a lot more feasible than when you're in like a hallway.
I don't know. A hallway is basically a tunnel.
Yeah, but there was like a lot more distance there, and if
Yeah.
he knocks them down a little bit,
Yeah.
then he has more time, and
It
they
was-
have
yeah.
to get from the walls of the tunnel to this cage that they're in.
I think you're right. It wasn't like completely crazy. Like they clearly thought about it some. I think that bigger than the final sequence there was just like in the hospital, where before that the Demogorgon had like the Demogorgons had been the Demodogs or whatever had been like really just devastatingly fast and ruthless. Like
Yeah.
they didn't like kill one dude and sit there for a while. Like they were like people. They like one guy took one guy down and like the rest of them like fucking went. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And they
I'm
seemed
with you on
like
that they were as strong as they needed to be for the scene.
Yeah, they were as strong as plot.
Which, like whatever. Like obviously it doesn't kill the show, but like I feel like it's the type of thing that you can avoid with like slightly tighter plotting, slightly tighter blocking and scripting. Like make it so that I mean, like in that scene, it would have been as simple as put the rest of like everyone else outside the doors, like outside the glass
Right.
doors, and then Bob like stops when he sees them and then dies, and then the other Demodogs throw themselves against the glass door, and they had like just enough time to get out. You know what I mean? There's ways to like rework that scene slightly where it doesn't feel like the director had to like pull punches from these horrible upside down monster things to keep the whole cast alive.
Yeah.
And like, how are they able to? These Demodog, I mean, granted, they were in large swarms, but like the fact that like there were no survivors except for Owens and the main characters.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, that goes into like the 80s or movie where, like everybody who's not important gets butchered.
Yeah. My headcanon is there are other survivors.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Too.
That some were just like hiding in various places because like it seemed like if you didn't make noise, they weren't going to bother you.
Yeah.
So I thought that like we saw a bunch of people get slaughtered, but they still like Hawkins' labs didn't get decimated, and we kind of seen that confirmed a little bit at the end when everyone's filing out.
And obviously there was like even the security guard dude at the gate that had to just be like, fuck it, not my problem, and left.
Yeah.
I love the fact that there had to have been a security guard there. He could not have died, or else like they have bigger problems on their hands. He just said fuck it and left.
That is kind of amazing, actually. I don't know, maybe he had security camera footage in there, and he's like, fuck that.
Fuck this noise, yeah.
I mean, granted, I would say fuck that noise too, but like...
He probably got in a car. He's probably like as far away as he can physically get.
Sounds like a not my problem, guys.
Yeah, like they don't have Google Maps, but he found a globe and kind of like put his finger on Hawkins and just like put the other finger like as far around it as he could get, and he's like, "That's where I live now." So let's find an island out in like the Indian Ocean. Let's do this thing.
Or just to as a nod to Thor Ragnarok, I need to get off this planet.
Haven't seen that yet. I need to see that.
I do too.
I won't give you context to that line.
That's fine.
Amazing
line. So, Nick, since you've like kind of scrolled back to it a couple times, every time I see your drawing of Will, I think of like Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men. Like that's kind of what it.
That's his haircut. That's
like
exactly his haircut.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Like that kind of like page boy bowl cut type of thing.
So naturally, the character that came out the best so far is Dustin.
Obviously. Well, he has the most distinctive features.
I love Dustin.
Yeah. Dustin is cute. Adorable. Also
He's my child.
Fucking idiot.
No, like I told you guys earlier, it's exactly what I would do in that situation. Like, I couldn't be mad at Dustin, and I think it was just great that the audience knew, all other characters knew, everyone knew that this was, like, something terrible from the Upside Down, and Dustin's like, no, maybe it's, like, a cool reptile, and I'll, like, impress this girl with it.
Yeah, I want to impress a girl.
Dustin,
let me keep this weird exchange right now.
Stop,
yeah.
no.
No, and I like that. It's like in Hawkins, where they have like already like encountered supernatural bullshit.
Yeah.
He finds a creature that's unidentified and goes, well, it might just be an unidentified species.
Yeah.
Yep. In
My
Indiana.
13-year-old self
Dustin
is going to like be able to name a creature.
Oh, Dustin,
I actually
stop.
read an article by is it hepatologist?
Herpetologist?
Herpetologist. I was thinking herpetologist, but I thought that everyone would laugh at me if I was wrong. But it was by a herpetologist on Dustin's research that he does.
Yeah, I saw that. Or user maybe.
I don't know what that was, but apparently he like the species that he references, that he thinks that it's this species, was not found, I think, until like 2 years later. And I think that they said it was like from Indiana, but it was actually from like India. Little different.
That's funny.
Listen.
Minor differences. It's a slightly different universe, Fiona.
I'm sorry, like
Terrible
this,
continuity, literally unwatchable.
if they're going to get
This
pissed
show
at the
sucks.
fact that these people looked up these creatures to know what they are, and then some asshole is like, "Oh, well, you see, that one did not come out until 2 years after it was discovered. 2 years after this, so that doesn't."
Tanner, have you met the internet?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm going to say this.
And to be fair, the guy that said that, the herpetologist, he was like, "This is not like the show's enjoyable. This is not a reason to not watch it. It was just like a funny little thing that he wrote."
Yeah.
I mean, that's fair. Like
It's
that's
a
fair,
fun
especially if-
fact.
okay, I guess I'll put it back. If that's like a cool little thing, then I'm cool with it. If these are people who are like, this show is terrible because of this reason,
No. It wasn't like that.
sincerely
Yeah, it
fuck
wasn't like that at all. It was mostly like a joke.
It wasn't like the really smug Neil deGrasse Tyson sort of thing.
And even then, at least Neil deGrasse Tyson has the decency to be charismatic.
Yeah. I find this might just be like a consequence of following him primarily on Twitter. I unfollowed him after a while, but like at least on Twitter, he just comes across like just insufferably smug. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
And I'm like, Neil, like, we get it. You science.
Oh,
That's cool.
You science real hard.
But like maybe science less when it comes to things you don't like understand in any meaningful way.
Yeah. And like, shows don't always have to have like real world total, equivalent continuity, whatever. Like that kind of stuff, like maybe if you're like an expert in that and they're like doing everything else right, sometimes it's like annoying for it to be like, totally off base. But I mean, like, we can all enjoy like, even like medical dramas have a long history of doing this. And I know everyone's like, well, Scrubs. I'm like, but it's like, it's entertaining on some level.
Yeah.
Like they don't always, wear their masks when they should because you want to see their expressions because they're actors.
Yeah.
It's like
I don't
it's
wanna see
like
their
weighing art
expressions.
versus
Human
accuracy.
expressions are I don't want to see that shit.
Hey, Donald Faison is a beautiful man.
same.
Well, Scrubs is like the most medically accurate, like medical fiction
But
show.
But they can get away with it because it's
Yeah.
not about the medicine like at all, really.
Right.
Like
So that-
it's like lots of just like silly character gags.
Yeah. And like, Grey's Anatomy is about like doctor stress, and Scrubs is about like silly situations while they like encounter strange things.
Plus, I fundamentally think that of all genres of like television, especially, like the sitcom is the most realistic. Let's be frank.
Yeah.
Like if life is a media genre, it's a sitcom.
Well, you
Well,
Big Bang
I
Theory.
feel
Never be Big Bang Theory.
due to the fact that comedies don't have to like build upon, like they don't have to hyper dramatize something.
Yeah.
right.
They have to
And I
make a
feel like-
situation funny,
Right.
which is what
And
you
I
can
feel-
really do. Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
feel like in doing that too, you almost like have to be more accurate to make people like take it more seriously.
Yeah.
Like there's a pretty long history of people like brushing off comedies when I think that they can be like really smart and clever, and dramas are automatically good when I feel like that is not the case.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I think that there is that aspect to it. Like Scrubs needs a medical consultant, and they need one on every
Yeah.
episode because it's just like goofy, silly bullshit.
Yeah.
Whereas like Grey's Anatomy, like that's drama. That's real drama. That was
Yeah.
I don't even know what channel that
I
was
mean, plus
on,
I
but-
also think that comedy is a lot easier to work around reality in some ways.
Mhm.
Like oftentimes like the funniest stuff, like if you listen to like stand up or something, at least I find like the funniest stand up comedy comes from situations that maybe they're real, maybe they make it up, but they feel very like I relate to that.
Yeah, like comedy is like birthed in relatability.
Yeah. So I feel like bringing in a lot of realism to your comedy, and then just having the characters be a little snappier than real people, and having the situations a little more ridiculous than real situations. And I say a little because real life situations can be pretty fucking ridiculous.
Right.
Or maybe
Mhm.
my life is weird, but
there's also the moment of like, whenever the drama gets serious, it's par for the course. But whenever the clown cries, you take notice.
Yeah.
So they have the open to also do serious moments with a lot more impact.
Yeah.
But I think we have gone straight a little too far from the Stranger Things.
Nah, man.
Nah, this is
what the show's all about. Yeah.
Going
Tanner, you
fucking
here last time.
crazy.
We went all over the place.
We did. We started talking about accessibility and like all sorts of stuff. But since there are a couple people watching right now, feel free to throw up comments, questions, whatever in the chat, and I will let these assholes know when it happens.
I'm watching the chat as well. So
okay,
Yeah.
so one of us will say, something.
My brother's in the chat. Hi, Mark.
No,
Hi,
it's
Mark.
definitely not Mark.
It's definitely not Mark.
Definitely not Mark.
Oh man, bamboozled again.
Yeah,
Oh, hi, Mark.
Nick, please.
You're picking.
No, but
Oh, yeah.
fair enough. We probably could talk about Stranger Things.
Yeah, like.
I just want to keep talking about Steve. That's all I want to talk about. Steve.
Why didn't Steve bring out the baseball bat with nails to confront Billy? That's my question.
Because that's a person, Tom. You're talking about Steve making some bad decisions. Like, they can handle Billy. Like,
See,
Billy is a
this is the point
person,
that Terry-
and like taking a baseball bat to his head has like some pretty serious consequences.
So
and also, it makes Steve a very different character if he's willing to resort to that.
That's fair. But here's my counterpoint: that this is something that Terry Pratchett in one of his novels points out, that the point of a weapon is that you don't have to use it.
Yes.
So here's the thing: Steve could take that out there and not plan to use it, but probably win the fight just by being the guy with the baseball bat with spikes in it. You know what I mean?
But that looks so much more suspicious if he's really trying to be like, yeah, your sister's not here, because that was the plan, to be like, no, she's not here. If he comes out with like a baseball bat with nails in it and is like, yeah, your sister's not here, like, of course Billy is going to like call the police, you know?
That's fair. That's a fair point. He was trying to be deceptive.
And like I said, the entire purpose of like, I mean, a major purpose of Billy is to make Steve a more relatable person from his assholishness of season 1. So Steve has to not resort to the baseball bat.
That's
like
fair.
he has to take high ground.
Okay.
I
can't believe I'm the one sitting here being like, no, you should fuck him up. And I for the record, I'm not. I don't think he should use the baseball bat. I just thought that, considering that a fight seemed likely, having it there to diffuse the fight might have been.
I don't think it would have diffused the fight. I think that Billy is exactly the type of crazy to charge him anyway.
That's fair.
And then if he loses,
and then he's sort of like forced.
Yeah,
that's a good
he
point.
is
That's
the
a good
one
point.
getting murdered.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll take it.
We have a comment from the chat from definitely not Mark. Backtracking slightly, it seems like some shows use almost like what would be an equivalent to dynamic game difficulty balancing. I agree with you guys. A lot of shows seem to address the power resistance of its characters or creatures. Stranger Things has some examples of that. Do you guys feel this is lazy writing or on some level an acceptable parameter to bend in works of fiction such as Stranger Things?
Yes.
I think it's okay to bend it. I think it depends on what it is.
Like I think lazy is a strong word. I think it's something that, like, really tight, careful, intelligent writing can work around and can do better at. And I personally tend to like it when that effort is made. On the other hand, I think that oftentimes you just have a lot more flexibility with where you take the plot if you worry less about that kind of thing, which I also am sympathetic to. Because, I mean, like, I think it's easy as a writer to get stuck in sort of, like, the George R.R. Martin trap, where he, like, spends years, like, rewriting sections over and over because he's, like, slightly unsatisfied with one thing that, like, doesn't matter all that much. Do you know what I mean? That's the impression I get. I mean, obviously we don't see what it is he's scrapping, but that's the impression I get, is that he just is trying very, very hard to, like, not do that kind of thing, and it pushes things back to a ridiculous level. On the other hand, like, my opinion is that it's something that we should value in writing, but it's not something that we should just, like, say is the only thing that matters in writing. Like, a lot of things matter in writing, and writing is hard.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
most people are, even people who are good at it, aren't, like, perfect at it.
I'm going to interject here
Okay.
and say it's not just writing when you have a show. I think like comparing it to a book is like fair in some levels, but adding in a show adds in so many different aspects, like the blocking matters and like what they can do with special effects matters and like what the actors can do matters. So I feel like in a show, I kind of like for a show or movie, I guess I should say, I kind of like forgive it a little bit more because you have to deal with like what the director wants, like what, you know, your production company wants, all sorts of different stuff. So sometimes like making it just something that works for that scene, I think is forgivable. If you do it like constantly and nothing seems to like make sense, then I think it's a problem. But if it's stuff like, you know, a bunch of nerds being like, well, you see Hopper like only shot, you know, 10 bullets and, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I don't actually think it's an issue to discuss those things. But
I have a little bit of agreement with Fiona on like, writing is extremely hard, and even good ones make mistakes, which I think is what happens here. Like, you set up the parameters of how awesome the Demodogs are, and then in another scene, Hopper, because Hopper has main character traits, is able to mow through these motherfuckers with not ease, but he's doing a lot better than the trained military guys walking the lab. And it's one of those things, like, as long as it's not extremely noticeable, then, like, I mean, if it's done to the point where, like, you've set the parameters and you follow them, you know, that's a good, you know, that's great. That's fantastic. You fail if people are noticing, like, listen, I have no idea how strong or how weak these creatures are. Or if it's this, where, like, we're starting to really think about it and it's like, you know, we don't really know how strong or weak these things are. Like, I think that it's a flaw, but it's a forgivable flaw.
That's, I think, more or less how I feel. I think I come down a little bit harder against it because the big thing to me is it makes it hard. To me, it like destroys tension.
Yeah,
because it makes it hard for me to figure out how bad the situation is supposed to be. Like, this is something that came up actually when I watched Spider-Man. Right, I might have brought this up on one of our shows.
Which one?
The latest one, Homecoming.
Oh, Homecoming.
So overall, I really like that movie. But something that I thought was really interesting was there's like this contrast between how they treated his like web shooting stuff versus how they treated his super strength. Okay, so like his web shooting was not just well defined, but also like the movie spent a lot of time actually exploring what exactly it is he can do with his webs and like what his limits are. So I always felt like I had a really firm idea of what I could expect his webs to achieve. And so every like success with the webs and every failure with the webs felt kind of earned on that level, right?
Yeah.
Whereas he was also given, like, clearly he was given like super strength, but it wasn't really explained. And it was also felt very like he was just exactly as strong as the plot required. Which, and then towards the end of the movie, hopefully this isn't too much in spoilers, he's like put in a situation where he has like a bunch of stuff fall on him, right? And he has to like push it off and get up. And that scene I really was kind of broken, in my opinion, because we just have zero context for if this is like, is this like a lot of stuff? Is this like some stuff? Like we don't really know how strong he's supposed to be. We don't really have, like, we haven't had a scene of him like in the gym, like putting more and more weight and then like struggling to lift as much as he can and he can't quite lift enough. You know what I mean? Like we have that scene, then it like works better because it's supposed to be like a triumphant moment as he like tries and fails and then like pushes through. But like that kind of thing, like if we had, like I almost imagine like, you know, put him in the gym with Tony Stark and he's like, you know, Tony like keeps putting weight on and Peter's like keeps lifting it, and then he gets to the point where he just can't go anymore, and Tony's like, man, you're gonna have to do better than that. Like the Hulk can do twice that. Like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that we have to look at like what the show or movie or book or whatever is trying to accomplish. So I think that with Stranger Things, it relies so heavily on 80s tropes that I don't think that the focus is like what the Demodogs can and cannot do. In Spider-Man, I think that they were trying to define what he, as Spider-Man, different from Andrew Garfield or from the comics or from Tobey Maguire, could do. So I think that there it like fails a little bit where we don't see like a point of reference of him growing. So I just am not sure it's like entirely the focus. Like I think back to conversations I've had about the Dresden Files versus Harry Potter. Like both are, about wizards named Harry, which is how this conversation has come up in my life. And I hate Dresden Files so much. And I've always get the argument that oh, well, the magic system's so much better. And I'm like, I do not care. Like, that is like not
Dresden Files' magic system isn't that... I mean, I like Dresden Files. The magic system in Dresden Files is, like, not fleshed out at all, really.
Well,
like, the magic system in Dresden Files is, like...
This...
Sorry, go ahead.
It's always been with, like, annoying people. Gotcha. It's like, well, like, what are the limitations of like a wand, whatever? And I'm like, I don't go to Harry Potter for like, exact like how does this magic work, and like why couldn't we do it this way? And like, like all the time turners were destroyed because they're just like these OP, whatever. And I think that you can examine that and criticize that, but at the end of the day, like what people come to Harry Potter for is its excellent characters and like that kind of thing, rather than like having a perfect magic system.
Yeah, and plus, like in Harry Potter, most of the conflicts are personal, so like the magic just isn't as important. And Dresden Files is not like the sterling example of a really smart magic system either. Like Dresden Files is like the magic system is Harry Dresden does stuff. And then he runs out of power when the plot says Dresden needs to get his shit kicked in now. Like there's not really like I don't think Jim Butcher is there like doing like complex math in the background trying to figure out exactly how many units of magical power Dresden has expended doing each spell. I think that it just like shit happens. And then, like, in Dresden, it works, because Dresden is also not really about the magic. It's about, like, the mystery and the detective stuff. Like, it's not really, like, the points.
Like, I think it just goes back to, like, what is the accomplishment and how noticeable is it? Like, with the Demodogs, I feel like the Demodogs was just a slight weakness in the writing for that season. And it's not a main, like, it's not something that you should take serious flaws with.
Well,
it's like, all they really needed, if the production allowed, was just like a couple of scenes where the soldiers are holding their own with the Demodogs, but they get overwhelmed by overwhelming numbers.
Yeah, that would have been cool to see.
Similar to go back to Aliens, actually, whenever they're in the reactor core and the Marines are getting their shit kicked in, but after they're like, holy shit, we're getting our shit kicked in, they kick in, they become Marines, and they're fighting and they're holding their own, but they're, still getting their ass rocked.
Yeah.
In this one, it looked like if your name is not Hopper,
you can't do it.
You can't do shit against them.
Yeah,
but that is the perfect example of that trope, which is what the show's about.
That's fair.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is I think they did like made a specific point to establish that the Demodogs are not as powerful as the Demogorgon from the last season.
Like, great job. To go an example of their own thing, though, real quick, they did a great job establishing the Demogorgon, how powerful it is, how strong it is, and what it's needed to take it out.
Yeah, I felt that is the difference between the seasons. Is that the Demogorgon was, I think, much more carefully handled as an enemy than anything in season 2. Which once again, I want to say, like, I think that the seasons were very different, even though, like, in a lot of ways they were similar. Like, I think that overall they're very different shows going on in a lot of ways. But season
Yeah.
1, I think, did a much just put more energy, like writers' time and effort, and just time on screen into really establishing the Demogorgon as a presence. So like I felt like we really kind of understood what the Demogorgon could do, and
I think. Go ahead. I was
Yeah.
going to say that I think that makes sense, like given the type of stories that they were telling.
Yeah, I agree.
Plus, like, when you get 2 sequels, and, you know, Stranger Things 2 goes back to your point of it was very much a sequel.
Yes.
Like, a lot of sequels just show their heroes being cool because,
because we want it.
Because the original one is about the struggle and trying to get there, and then the second season, like, the sequel rather, they know what's going on and what's happening, so we get to see him like being badass.
And a lot of the times, the second, like the sequel, is almost like a victory lap in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like, like we made this really cool thing people liked. We're just gonna take the characters and like, you know, have some fun with it. Take a victory lap. I feel like Stranger Things 2 is that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like there's like 2 ways like a sequel can kind of be, which is like the just take a victory lap style, where it's like we're just gonna have the characters be badder than they've ever been. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like the Empire Strikes Back sequel that tries to actually be like surpass the original, and usually the pattern there is like the heroes have a worse time of it.
Yeah,
like the heroes get badder, but the villains get badder faster, and that sort of like set of tropes, like if they did that, then this would be like the season that doesn't work out so great in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard, and like with Stranger Things, especially since it's like about kids, that's I think harder to pull off.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think they did try to do that to some extent, because like you can look at the situation with Will getting more severe, like you know, like
Fair.
that, like Will is not a badass in this.
Yeah,
Will is like basically like copy paste the exorcism, you know, or the exorcist, you know, like
I like those nods though to the exorcist.
Right.
But
so, like,
we also didn't see Will for season 1, so he is basically like a new character to us
in a lot of ways. But in this season, like 11, like is much more badass, and like closes the gate and really just kicks a lot of ass. I mean, she just like straight up fucking murders a Demodog like it's not even a thing in this season.
Right.
Which is pretty baller, and I loved it.
It took so much preparation for her to get to like that in between world, and this one she just has to turn on a radio and she's like good.
Yeah.
And that's something that I noticed right away. Like, whoa, 11 really like powered up really hard when she like went back into the upside down, like poofed herself back in there.
Right.
What I love about 11 in this season, and this is not, I'm not criticizing writing here, it's just the fact like 11 had to go on this gigantic thing of self-discovery, because if she was there from the beginning, this would have been a much shorter season.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Well, the other interesting thing is it's like they like show that 11's power had even increased from the beginning of the season, because we see her using her powers for just mundane shit. I don't know if you guys noticed, but like when it first shows Hopper returning back to his cabin, 11 unlocks the door to let him in, but she's not at the door.
We see her unlock doors like that throughout the season.
She's in the complete other room. Hopper walks, like you hear the door unclick, and then Hopper immediately walks in, and then the camera pans around, and there's nobody there. And then 11, which I thought was such a subtle little thing, that that if you weren't really paying attention, you wouldn't have thought about it. But I'm like, holy shit! Like,
so
it's where she never closes the door with her hands. She never closes the door with her hands. She's always does the swishing motion, and it closes the door.
So here's something that I wanted to bring up, like with 11's powers, and also with Collie's powers, like we see like the unifying idea that like they get these bloody noses, right?
And bloody ears, but usually can't see that as much.
I hadn't even noticed that, actually.
Yeah.
Or I'd forgotten it if I had. But that feels a little bit like... Do you guys feel like you have the sense of like waiting for the other shoe to drop on that? Because it's like she,
yeah,
like they get
it's
these bloody
clearly
noses.
damage.
Yeah, but it doesn't ever seem to go further. But there's also like these sinister implications, like these powers are like harming them. But like right now, it seems like it's a little bloody nose and like it clears up right away. But like they could have chosen other ways to show them like, oh, their power is like a thing now. But like they always, and it's not just like the bloody nose, but like it's always like this very like sort of sinister close up shot as like the blood like runs down, and it's like it always feels to me like there's like another shoe just waiting to drop of like what are they doing to themselves with these powers? Like how bad is it? Like
that's really interesting.
Cost. I don't know.
I never really.
Well, you can see 11 when she's doing her thing too. Like you can see it. Like she doesn't bleed through her eyes, but you can see all the veins in her face, and like her eye, like her pupils get huge and like really distorted. So it's like it's not something that is like meant to happen. It's that like sci-fi trope, like, oh, we only use 10% of our brains. What if we could use the other 90%? We could do these superhuman things.
We get nosebleeds and earbleeds all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like clearly it's not supposed to happen, but we haven't seen the long-term effects other than like what has happened to these kids. Like we've only seen 2 of them so far. And like there's kind of the implication that these are the 2 who could like withstand this.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm totally off base there because
I think they left themselves open to have more, and I feel like I would be shocked if they don't do that.
I think a few of these kids wouldn't have made it, though.
I think that's possible.
All 11. We're never going to meet 1 or 2 or 5 because they're probably dead.
Yeah.
And I think it's safe to assume 11 was the most recent.
Yeah, she's the one that like was successful, and it seems to like. Is it that, because she and Kali have different powers, is it going to be always that same thing? It's just 11s were the powers that they were looking for.
Maybe.
That's what I got. I don't know. Maybe I'm like totally off base
It might not even have been that they were looking for any powers in particular. They were just like, what powers do you get and how can we use them?
Yeah, that could be. Well, it does seem like 11 was of particular interest to them.
Because
after
they wanted
her powers
to open the gate.
She's like, Well, that's the other thing. Like that brings into my question is like, what is the nature of these powers?
Yeah. And
how does it relate to the Upside Down? Was it something that just the nature of 11's powers were capable of ripping into this place, or was it that the powers are like on a fundamental level tied to the Upside Down? And then if that's the case, like theory. Or if it's Tom's theory, which is an interesting theory. I don't know if that's the case either, but it is at least an interesting theory.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe the theory right now, but like it's a thought.
What it's like if you think about it, like what does the trauma of an 11-year-old girl look like if you like manifested it into like a place? You know what I mean? Like like 11 years of like isolation and torture, like yeah. No, like that's a cool idea, but I don't think that's actually.
Yeah. I think that's the type of thing that if they did it that way, like this would have to be the final season,
right?
And they would have had to like it would be over. Like 11 would like realize, oh, this is like inside me all along, and then like banish it or something. And
then it's like, how much would that fuck up 11? Like, how many people died accidentally because of the manifestation of her psyche?
Yeah,
like
pretty dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would be, kind of a cool ending for her, but not a great one.
Yeah.
But we have also seen people be connected to the Upside Down in pretty significant ways. What I want to know with 11, because one of the most disappointing things for me this season was that they did what I hate, which is the self-sacrifice that just leads to you like coming back and nothing really changing.
Yeah.
And like 11 had some social changes.
Yeah.
Like she couldn't go back because they fed the Wheelers all this stuff, and Hawkins was watching very closely, and they had to keep her in hiding. But it was like just that she had poofed herself into the Upside Down. And she almost seems to have gotten like stronger for it. So I don't know what is going on with that, if there's going to be some kind of a payoff later, but that is like my number one pet peeve with like media, is when someone sacrifices themselves and it's just like, just kidding. They were actually fine. They just like were out of sight for a couple minutes.
Well, they even said that 11 wasn't originally going to survive.
Yeah.
Like in the original draft. But the other thing is I feel like they did kind of write themselves into a corner at the end of the first season with the story.
Yeah.
But I do feel like they probably could have done something better, like because they made it so 11 comes back like the same day, and then she's just been like in hiding ever since. Like she's been hiding in the woods for at least 2 months. Is the implication, because like at the end of the first season, Hopper's leaving her stuff at Christmas. Like, so she's been living in the cold by herself for 2 months. Yeah. So like, so that's all it is. It's like she comes back and then she's just like in hiding, which is weird because it's like if she's just in hiding, why doesn't she come back on her own?
Yeah. What I kind of wish, and this is kind of like how I interpreted what they were doing, but I feel like they didn't like sell it as well as they maybe could have. Is like emphasize like the self-sacrificial nature of what she was doing, because that's how I kind of read it. Because like even like right when it happened, I was like, you know what? I don't think 11 is dead.
No.
Like even before like we see like the egos and everything, like I'm like no, like she. But what I thought was like she was popped away, and given that opportunity to make a clean exit, took it because she didn't want to endanger her friends anymore. That's how I read it, and I kind of wish that they had like leaned into that harder, because I took it as like she cared about her friends and had this moment to kind of be the hero and just exit stage left, and then she was like, you know what, I can stay exited, and like they can remember me well, but they won't have like stormtroopers knocking their door down all the time. Like I'll just be like doing my thing. But that's not really how they portrayed it. They portrayed it more like she was trying to come back and then like felt betrayed or something. It seemed almost how it was played, and it felt kind of weird.
Well, I mean, like the other thing is,
she was mad that they had forgotten her.
Yeah.
But she didn't like come around, and then it seemed like she didn't want to because she was afraid of what would be for them. Yeah. But then she was also mad at Hopper about that same issue. It like didn't quite make sense.
Yeah. I'm going to make an argument here.
Yeah.
I think it makes perfect sense because she's a child.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think that makes perfect sense. So, like, she did what she had to do to save her friends, but given the opportunity to return, she's going to take every opportunity because her connection she made with Mike, the connection she made with her friends. And she doesn't quite understand why she can't.
Yeah.
But then why didn't she come back earlier in the woods? Like, why did she spend those months in the woods?
That was my complaint. Like, and I guess you could make the argument that, like, she couldn't find her way back, but she finds her way all the way to fucking Chicago.
Bullshit.
Yeah. No, I mean, what I read into what we saw is that her plan was to come back and rejoin the party, and then she saw Mike and saw him talking to whoever and was like, "Oh, Mike has betrayed me" or something. But, like, it wasn't
then
entirely
she
clear.
had been spying on him from the Nether for like almost a year at that point. And like I kind of get the seeing in that moment, but that still doesn't explain the months in the woods.
That's
like the months in the woods is what messes us up.
No,
actually, what Max was doing.
Yeah.
My argument would probably have been like, because Hopper is doing the soon bit where it's always like, oh yeah, we're going to go see Mike soon. And she's even finally like, when soon? Is it going to be 300 days from now? 100, like 10,000 days from now?
Yeah.
So maybe she was believing Hopper at first, would be my argument.
Well,
But eventually she's starting to stop believing the bullshit.
But we're talking about the time in the woods before Hopper, though.
Right.
That's the more like.
Yeah, I actually forgot about the scene where she went to Mike's house and saw. Yeah, I forgot about it. So so I guess it would be the decision to like protect like Mike and his friends.
That's the one that I think makes the most sense.
Yeah,
but I felt like the show could have played that harder, and I feel like if that's the case, then like the self-sacrifice holds. Like, yeah, she didn't die, but like she really did sacrifice herself for her friends. Like, if that's the motive.
Then I wish that they would have shown Hopper promise her that one day she could go back. Because I think that would make her believe, like, things can be different. Like, there is an adult here, rather than them both just understanding that things can't be this way. And I think that even works that she would get frustrated eventually, just being inside and want to take the risk. But, like, that whole, like, when is soon? Why are you keeping me trapped here? I'm a prisoner. I don't know.
Yeah, it didn't seem to make sense after, like, she clearly made the decision to keep herself isolated anyway.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess there could be, like, regret involved. Like, she's a kid and, you know, it's been a year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
that's my feelings. Like, this is very realistic behavior for an 11-year-old child.
Well, she's 13.
She's 13 now? I don't know.
12 to 13.
No, Nick, her name is 11. She's 11 years old forever.
Seems like Holly is 8 years old.
Yeah. No, so I think it's realistic behavior for someone her age. Like, I think it's realistic, but it's not, to me, it's not narratively satisfying.
Yeah, I can get that.
And in a lot of other ways, the show is very happy to have these kids act a lot older than their age for the sake of, like, it's a story. So, like, I find her behavior extremely believable. Just, I kind of wish it was more narratively satisfying.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a bad thing to want.
I don't think so.
But I don't know. It's just something that I hate in all media. So, like, when 11 disappeared and they made it very clear she was coming back, and I'm like, please make there be, like, sufficient consequences. And I feel like those consequences would have happened regardless of if she sacrificed herself or not, you know?
You don't feel like living with no one but Hopper to talk to for a year is not sufficient consequences?
No,
but I think that would have happened regardless. I think that Hopper would have gotten her out of there. Like, I don't feel like her sacrificing herself changed that series of events at all, other than, you know, she, like, killed a squirrel and possibly a guy.
That's fair.
In the woods for his hat.
That guy just took out like a log to the face. He's fine. He's got burns.
Okay. It was a flaming log too.
That was pretty intense.
But he's good.
Yeah. So on the Hopper question though, Hopper is fun to look at from a distance. You would not want to live with Hopper full time. That would be.
But, like, where else was she going to go? Like, Hopper had to be the one to find her, and also Hopper has this storyline where he has to, like, reconcile his feelings about fatherhood, because we, like, vaguely know that his daughter died and that it had something to do with Hawkins Labs, but we don't know much beyond that. So
you're totally right. It's just, I'm not saying it wouldn't be fun.
I don't think Hopper's daughter had anything to do with Hawkins Labs. I don't think that's even
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Nicholas, watch the show. Because if you watch when he goes to who's the new Hawkins scientist?
Owens.
Owens on the stairwell, all bloodied and stuff. If you look at him and look at season 1. That's where Hopper was when he's crying because his daughter was, like, dead. And they did confirm that was the same place.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a hospital staircase.
No, it was Hawkins Labs. And this was not said in the show. This was said in, like, interviews.
Mm-hmm.
That is the same place.
I feel like that changes, like, so many things that I don't know how I feel about it.
I had always suspected that his
time,
daughter had something like her. Well, I don't think that they ever say that his daughter is dead, for one, because I know that a theory is that she is still alive and had something to do with it. And I know that the first time I watched season 1 and I saw this and I knew that his daughter, like, something happened, but they were being very vague about it, I thought that his daughter was 11. But now that is clearly, like, not the case.
His daughter comes back with, like, I feel like would be, like, the biggest cop-out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just let her be dead and let him have, like, the moment of, you know, trying to get over his daughter, which is clearly the thing. Don't fairy tale it and have her come back and be Papa. Fuck off. Sorry, that's too saccharine sweet for my taste.
Like,
Yeah.
I
the other
don't
thing
think
they
that she's
could-
coming back. I think that something happened to her that had something to do with Hawkins Labs, and we're going to see, like, what the consequences of that was later.
I think that the other thing they could do with bringing her back would be like she comes back as a villain, and then Hopper has to like fight her or something.
That'd be
Also,
so cool.
No, that would be
He's still
No,
way too
Tom, I want it.
obvious.
No, I want it
That's
so
like
bad.
the obvious thing to do.
That's like, I'm going to write that fan fiction then. Hopper versus daughter.
Sarah, I think.
The happening.
The Hopper.
So, if we're going into, like, weird theories and whatnot, I had one that came to me a couple of days ago that I posted on Facebook I want to bring up now to see what the reaction to that would be. Have you all played the game Life is Strange?
I have not yet.
No.
Meaning to.
Do you know what it is?
Not really.
No.
I did see your theory.
I saw that they had some. I did not read it because I have the first game downloaded because it's free on Steam. So I downloaded it because at the Game Awards, the newest installation of that series is nominated for an award. So I went to figure out what the series is about so I could have an opinion, basically. But I have not played it. I don't know anything.
Max Caulfield is the main character, and also there's a Max in the Stranger Things one. But she basically all of a sudden one day gets the power to manipulate time. And everything she does is exactly the same as the characters from Stranger Things. She holds out her hand sometimes to control the power, which a lot of them tend to do. She gets a nosebleed from the same area. She's about the same age, because it happens in, I think, 2014, which would make her to a similar age to, like, somebody who had a child that grew up from Hawkins' lab.
Okay.
It's already established in Stranger Things that this is an hereditary thing. This telekinetic powers are hereditary. And, like, it would make a whole lot of sense that her mother would not tell her about any of this. And I was like, I think that Max is legitimately the offspring of someone from this character. And they both had the Strange in their name.
Yeah.
So it just
It's the
makes sense.
Strangerverse.
It's a Strange verse.
Strangerverse.
And Tad Strange from Gravity Falls is also in it. I decided just now.
Okay, I'll believe it.
Even though he doesn't, like, do anything. But I love me some Cecil Baldwin.
That's another thing I wanted to bring up that we can actually go, like, you know, debate about a little bit, since you all have not played Life is Strange, for shame. Is we talked about this earlier, is the fact that it's not Stranger Things Season 2, it's Stranger Things 2, and it comes across the sequel. And I've had a feeling about this for a while. I brought up before in other forums, is that the Netflix, Hulu, Amazon TV, original TV series are not television shows. They are hybrided movie television shows. And Stranger Things 2, once again, because the way that they're viewed is not like a TV show where you watch it on a week-to-week basis and you need to be reminded things. That tends to be they're binge-watched. And I feel like Stranger Things 2 was the first one that fully embraced that concept, where it's like, let's not shoot this as a traditional television show. Let's shoot this as a 9-hour epic movie.
Yeah. I actually think that a really interesting comparison is to a novel, which is traditionally a lot more, like, open than a movie. Like, you can put a lot more in a novel than you can in a typical movie.
And also, just real quick, they're called chapters. Each episode's a chapter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Stranger Things is like really does feel like just a long movie, which works really well for it. I think that some other originals have like a more sort of like novelistic feel where they're trying to be like that, like the series, like the season is like a single book almost.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to push and say that that's not how all of them are.
No.
Like, there's definitely more episodic stuff out there. Like, Master of None is a really good example in my mind. That was like had like some continuity, but I mean that's a comedy, so obviously it's a little different. But they like really that I mean that you could just put that on television and it would work just fine. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
My argument, like, I mean, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I should not say argument then. What I'm saying is, like, I feel like Stranger Things, and then especially Stranger Things 2, was the first one to realize this concept fully and use it to their advantage.
I think that what kind of makes Stranger Things work, and I think that this is something that all writers, especially writers who want to write for television, need to master, is writing for binge watching. Mm-hmm. And some shows like kind of work like that, but you know, people aren't watching week to week anymore, and you can see that especially with older shows where like, you know, each episode is very like encapsulated into its own thing, and Stranger Things just flows very beautifully one episode into the other.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, the kind of like, not every show needs to do this, but Stranger Things was designed to be a binge watch show. So I think that in doing that, you need to update like the formula with your show and like how that works. Like we can even see from, you know, from I think it's the second to last episode to the last episode where Mike sees 11 for the first time. So many shows would end that with the embrace, and they didn't. They ended it with the first look. And I think that was, you know, like kind of brilliant. And I think that it really adds to binge watching because like you have to continue then. Like you have to keep going.
Oh, sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry you weren't finished.
No, I was done.
Another thing, like let's take a very popular and like well-known let's take Breaking Bad for instance and see some of the differences there. Like for instance, an episode from Breaking Bad that always comes to mind is the Fly episode, where Walter White is chasing a fly around his laboratory, and it is the 100% nothing but filler episode where it has only tangential stakes because at the end he goes into like the actual plot and whatnot. But the entire show is what's the term I'm looking for? It's encapsulated, it's bottled.
Yeah.
It's a bottled episode. This is only connected to that universe. Like an episode like that's not going to happen in Stranger Things. You're not going to have
not to that extent. However, I think in Stranger Things you do have a one-off episode.
You do.
With 11. Yeah, 11 and Collie. And it really doesn't, like, obviously it's continuous in that it's important to 11's development, but like you could just drop that season and someone who doesn't really know that much about the show, and they would like be able to watch it just fine. You know what I mean? Like it works as its own thing. It's obviously it's not a bottle episode, but it's pretty contained, and that one felt to me almost like a throwback, and that's actually part of what I thought like made it feel out of place. Was it sort of felt like the whole show stopped to like do this little thing that they clearly thought was really important. And I know like a lot of critics have said it was really good. They really liked that episode. But I did feel like it felt out of place. Like it felt like it wasn't really contributing to the season's arc. Like it felt like it was like pressing the pause button and doing this other thing.
I guess it contributed enough that it just expanded on Elle's story and Elle's character. But I agree with you that does she need to join a gang? Does she need to you kind of see a lot of her own rebellions already without getting the 1990s Christian Bale look.
Yeah.
Bitchin'.
Bitchin'.
Yeah. No, like I think that's really interesting because it's like it's not like a literal bottle episode, but narratively,
it kind of serves like one.
It does serve that purpose. And you're right. Yeah, good.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt you. I think that narratively it does serve a purpose, and I think that its purpose is pretty important. Last season Elle's relationship with the world in general is just very different. Like last season we saw her like slaughter people without a second thought, really. And this season kind of digs a lot deeper into like regret and, you know, dealing with trauma. So I think that it's really important for us to see 11 grow, to see that, like, you know, death and revenge isn't always the best option, versus Kali, who has a, you know, kind of like sympathetic stance on it. Like she wants to, you know, go destroy these people, and she's okay with 11 not doing it, but she makes it very clear that that is like her purpose, and that is the way that she is going to heal from this.
I thought that sorry, I'm sorry. You keep going.
So, like, I mean, I think it was important to Elle's character development, especially since we barely get to see her interact with anyone who isn't Hopper. Yeah. And Hopper, like, Hopper will also just kind of kill people. So, and Elle, like, you know, other than that, was pretty much, like, just in the house. So I think that seeing her with her family and learning about what, you know, the horrible things that these people have done, and then, like, seeing her very shortly after that decide to not necessarily forgive, but to, you know, like move on in a sense, because these people do have lives and they have people that care about them, even though they are, like, you know, arguably evil people. I think that that's really important. And if we didn't have that, we wouldn't see Elle develop.
My other real quick to that is the differences between the Fly and that episode with the Breaking Bad analogy is the Fly does not expand upon things, as Yuna brought up. The Fly is purposely meant to be filler, to pad out a season. And it's kind of like the comedic episode where, like, I don't know, you're bored, so you watch Walter White try to kill a fly for 40 minutes. Or even with other even with other Breaking Bad episodes where, like, they seem to be slightly encapsulated because, like, you still need to push the narrative, but people just dropping in need to understand what all's going on. Stranger Things is definitely built, like, you can't just drop in at episode 3 and carry on. Like, with television shows, you can kind of miss an episode and still be brought up to par with what's going on. Stranger Things, if you miss the first two, you missed the opening part of a movie.
Right, and that's how it's designed. Like, it's designed, like, it goes back to the whole, like, this is how binge watching works. Like, you have those kind of drawbacks like that. Like, oh, you know, people are watching it that way. But then, too, you can't have, like, The Office or any other show where you can jump in and, like, get acquainted with who these characters are and then know who they are and what's going on for the next episode.
I also kind of appreciate that, like, Stranger Things, cause I know that a criticism I've read a lot of, like, these sort of, like, seasons as novel, seasons as movie sort of style shows, is they'll, like, do a few good episodes, and then just kind of nothing happens for a while, and then have another few good episodes. Like, I actually felt like Game of Thrones can fall into that trap a little bit. Where it's like they just spend a while, like, shuffling, you know, like, shuffling cards, and, like, not really doing much, and then, like, hit you with a couple big episodes at the end of the season. Whereas I feel like Stranger Things, much more.
There's always
there's like a structure within the season. Like I feel like other shows haven't. Like, Stranger Things almost feels like it took, like, a movie structure and figured out how to extend that structure across the season without it feeling slow. And I haven't, like, done the work to break down Stranger Things structure to fully understand what it is they did, but it does feel to me like it works better than anything else I've seen.
That was to more of my point. Like I said, like they were the first one to truly embrace what they were. Like, let's go back to another TV show that is meant for binge watching, which is like Orange is the New Black. Let's go to season 2 of Orange is the New Black. Once again, a good season, and it's done in the same way that it's built for binge watching, but there's still a disconnect. There's still like 5 episodes where nothing really happens. Where like the plot kind of like slows down a bit and just goes into pure character develop mode. While in Stranger Things, there's always something happening. There's always a plot to be pushed. Even with the disconnect episode, you're still pushing Elle's story. You're just the difference is you're focusing solely on Elle's story. That would be my argument, is that Stranger Things is the one to finally realize, let's not have character development episodes. Let's not slow down the season. Let's have this entire season not at a 10, but like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's not always at a 10,
it's like
but
it's
all
at 11.
Consistent 9. I got it. Yeah. No,
always
no,
at a consistent level of going.
Yeah. It's like a 9 until like the final episode when it turns it up to 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Or 11.
Or like they're constantly at a 7, and then they bump.
Yeah. That's fair. But yeah, it doesn't feel like there's nearly as much ebb and flow within the season. Like, it feels more like a steady ramp up to like a big finale.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm
glad that Roger appreciated my joke in the chat.
Roger's in the chat.
Roger's in
Roger.
the chat.
Hi, Roger.
Hi, Roger. He commented earlier, 11 joins the gang, which, yes. Greatest episode. That's it was almost like an Always Sunny style. Like, I think that someone made that comment. Maybe it was Roger. That it was just like, Always Sunny, but like Always Sunny in Hawkins. 11 joins the gang.
Yeah, I actually want to talk about that setup, that situation a little bit with like the whole like thing in Chicago and the gang, because it's like, so the situation with 8 and the gang, it's like first they like kind of establish, like make you like think that like the character 8 like joined these group of misfits.
Yeah. But
then it kind of it establishes the fact that like she's actually the driving force, and their purpose is to hunt down people from these experiments, which I wasn't expecting at all.
Me neither.
Which kind of like struck me as odd. I think it makes sense, but like especially for that cold open.
Yeah.
Which was brilliant, by the way, because it sets up this really interesting thing that only has a payoff like 3/4 of the way through the season, and it is the whole thing with 8, with as little as she actually has to do with the story, was an interesting choice.
I do feel like it was a misdirect.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I feel like how you feel about it kind of like it depends on how you feel about that sort of misdirection in the story.
Right. So, but like the other thing is it's like they also kind of like set it up to make you think that like they're bank robbers or they're criminals or something, and then they kind of like say that they're not, like they're actually on this like vengeance quest basically for the same purposes that like 11 is.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting to me because it's like, well, I feel like there's a lot more that went unexplained with 8 and like the origin and her origin. Yeah. Like, as upfront as she kind of was when speaking to 11 about him, I feel like there's a lot that still doesn't quite make sense that I would hope gets explained at some point.
I thought that Collie's story, like 8, I thought that it had like an interesting timely quality to it. Especially like the line like, it's something like, you can have mercy if you want, but don't take away my choice. Which, like, I feel like we're in a situation right now where we have like a sort of pretty significant public debate over like how do we want to handle men who hurt women. Like, what level of mercy, forgiveness, like excusal is appropriate. And I'm not like the show, I don't think it quite rises to the level of moral judgment, but the show does seem to suggest that like some level of taking, like, having mercy, forgiving, letting go is appropriate because they have 11 do it. And they sort of paint 8, Kali, as, like, this fairly sketchy figure. And I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. And I mean that in, like, a literal way. Like, I'm not quite sure what to make of it. But it did feel timely in some level.
Yeah, and I think that especially, like, Kali's whole, like, let your trauma drive you is something that is debated. And, like, do you fight? Do you forgive? Like, especially when it does seem, like, pretty systematic, like, with Hawkins and, like, you know, and that has, like, a real-world equivalency here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, like, there is no, like, right answer. I think that Kali is, like, sympathetic. Like, she should objectively not kill people, but that's obviously, like, a metaphor for something else. Also, in the chat, Roger, I know what you're mad about. I did bring it up, and no one got back to me. So be mad at everyone else.
Way to pass the buck, Fiona.
No, I did. Roger asked if we were doing something Stranger Things to let him know, and I did bring it up, and then just we forgot about it, I think.
Sorry.
Oops.
Sorry, Roger.
What is Roger referring to with the fake Papa scene? Is that?
The fake Papa. That's with Kali and with
yeah.
Yeah. And that one is, like, hard to watch because it's
pretty brutal.
Yeah. That, and it's so much like what Hopper says for Will and Bob's advice is actually works a lot better for 11 than it does for Will. Like, Bob's advice to, like, you know, just be like, go away. That's literally what she does to Papa.
Yeah.
And it works. And, like, there's still, you know, that hurt there. But in that moment, that gets, you know, Mr. Baldo or Papa or whoever, that gets him away.
That's an interesting thought.
This is why, like, I'm so pissed whenever people are like, that was terrible advice. But I was like, that was great advice for anybody except for Will.
Yeah.
Except for Will,
He did not have enough information to be giving advice. And he didn't know because they didn't tell him. But they also didn't know fully what was going on, I guess.
I also want to, before we move on much further, I want to say, like, I think that, like, that conversation around, like, mercy and forgiveness and how do we treat abusers is, like, a good conversation to have, but I'm not entirely sure, like, it's something that, like, the Duffer Brothers should be leading the charge on.
Right.
Like, they're, like, it's like two white dudes, like, and, like, I'm a white dude, and my take on it is, like, I just don't have that much to say. Like, I kind of, like, try and let people who are more affected by these things kind of take the lead.
My critique for the Duffer Brothers here and dealing with abusers and bullies and what I'm gonna go into like abuse and is that it's a very clear black and white dynamic where it's very clear that Brenner is an abusive human being that has tortured Elle, and then it's an argument of mercy versus forgiveness, and then you go into the bullies, which, yes, is an 80s trope. I get that. Yeah. But at the same time, the majority of those bullies don't exactly exist in this world. The bully, it tends to be like a friend who is being very controlling, or somebody that's not exactly, like, pushing somebody down. So, like, whenever you bring up these things, like, they're very clearly, like, white and black issues, and if you really want to get into it, you have to get into gray areas. Yeah. Like, dealing with the Wheeler parents as abusers. That would probably be a much more powerful narrative because they're both very abusive people, but they're just not hitting Mike and Nancy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not the Mayfields where, like, the guy's literally shoving Billy against a wall. Like, they're neglectful, they're horrible, they're terrible parents, but they're not exactly in the way that you typically see. Like, they're horrific, abusive people.
Yeah. So, like, I feel like there's a little bit of, like, trying to be like this kind of more or less lighthearted 80s romp with like definitely like creepy elements, but like very kitsch. And then they're like meshing it with like these very like hard to grapple with social issues, and like I don't think I can point to anything specific in the show and be like, this was handled poorly. But it's just like they're like walking some dangerous ground just doing it at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Fair.
like I said, like I don't. This is the type of thing where I usually try not to like form super strong opinions. I just kind of, but it's still just like like this could go really badly, really quickly.
Yeah, and I think that that's like so many shows have moved, especially like, you know, horror shows like American Horror Story. They have a lot more diversity. They've moved to have a lot more diversity in their directors and writers.
Yeah.
And I don't see the same thing from Stranger Things. Not to say that that isn't a good show, or even that it's a problem when one show does it, but it's a problem like when every show does it. So when you have like a show as popular and influential and like kind of like defining, if not like a genre and like a way of telling a story, defining like Netflix's shows and like what works for Netflix. And you don't get a lot, there's like a little bit of responsibility to tell everyone's story. And I think that like some of the criticisms with the characters, especially with Max, I think it would have been different if they would have had, you know, women writing it, or like it would have, or like running the show, you know.
I don't know what the writer's room looked like, honestly. It's hard to say. Like, but I know, like,
I didn't look at the writers, but I looked at the directors, and it was like
very male.
Yeah.
That's what struck me. And like, if you look at like the after show they did, it's like a lot of dudes. Like, there's women there, but it's a lot of dudes.
Right.
It's a lot of white dudes.
Yeah, there's a lot of dudes.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Like it felt like the type of thing well-meaning dudes would put together.
Right. And
Frankly,
I like also like with having, you know, a lot of the characters be like white men, I also like don't love the idea of, you know, white men telling the story of like, you know, women or people of color or whatever.
That's
so
fair.
in that
That's
sense,
fair.
like I'm kind of like, you know, they're sticking to what they know, and that's good. But there is a responsibility then to have diversity in your writer's room so that as you develop seasons and it goes beyond your personal experience, and so much of Stranger Things is clearly the Duffer Brothers' personal experiences and what it was like for them growing up. You need to like develop these other characters. Like you need to tell these other stories that you might not be the expert on.
Yeah.
I do like that the one thing the Duffer Brothers brought up was a covert level of racism that a lot of shows don't tend to touch upon.
They
was
did
the
hit
argument
on some of that, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Like,
they
what
very
was-
briefly mentioned it with Winston and Ghostbusters.
making Lucas be Winston because he's black, and not Winston, Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. Lucas just flat out calling him out, being like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Although
I also think I read Billy's reaction to Max hanging out with Lucas as
I
very
read as
racial.
very
that
racist.
one too.
Yeah.
Where it's not overtly stated, like he's like,
Yeah.
you know,
But
racial,
I took
fairly
it that
racist.
way. Yeah.
Right.
I
I
took it
don't
that
know
way.
what other reason he would be to like, don't hang out with that kid. Because he didn't seem to have a problem when he saw like a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially since he's a fucker. Like, granted, like, Billy's a fucker, and then to be like, don't hang out with the bad type. And Billy seems to revel in his assholishness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very clearly racist.
Yeah.
Right. But so in the chat talking about I agree, Roger, it wasn't addressed in any sort of meaningful way. They just kind of dropped it. Like they were just like, oh, here's the implication of some kind of like racist thought, but then they didn't explore it beyond that. Also, like Jonathan from the first season. Yeah, like
You should also
Jonathan from the first season too, like really violating Nancy's privacy like that. And I know that,
Mm,
what's his name? Steve, who, did Nancy Wheeler as a slut, which is still like bad, but I think that like what Jonathan did is just completely on a different level. And he's like, it's art, I'm tortured, like love me. Like
yeah.
that's such a weird like white dude trope, and I think that we should drop it. Like I hate it, and I feel like it puts
I
like
had honestly
Nancy
forgotten
on this.
about that, but yeah.
Yeah, they never like talk about it again. It's like Nancy is like really upset by it too.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, well, Jonathan's camera was broken. That's way worse. Like,
Yeah.
it's like it's very strange how they do that. Like
Yeah.
Nancy never gets to have feelings about it. Like she's like, I really didn't like that. And then Steve reacts very angrily, and it
Yeah.
makes like Nancy into like it turns into this weird guilt trip for her.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
The only like argument I would have to that is I'm not defending Jonathan because Jonathan's actions were reprehensible and it should have been brought up a lot more, is that Steve didn't do it to defend his girlfriend. He did it as a showing of power.
No, and I totally agree with that. I think that he just
Like,
wanted
that's
to, mess with
why-
Jonathan.
Yeah.
That's why I had the only definitely to Roger in the chat. Like it made the creep sympathetic, but if Steve had approached that as like someone actually defending, because all I saw from that is like it's not someone protecting someone, it was someone like pushing power on it, so it instantly made the creep sympathetic.
Right. And Steve was seeing it too. Like it was not because like this violated Nancy. It was because like it's his girlfriend and he is like King Steve and he has to have this pissing contest with Jonathan.
Actually, it's even more selfish than that, because if you recall, he was worried about his parents finding out they had a party.
That's true.
Mm,
Yeah, it was also that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it was very selfish. Yeah.
Why can't? Yeah, and this stuff is like never addressed except unless it's in like this kind of metaphor type of way, which like is good when we talk about like mental health and stuff like that. Like I feel like that was like very much legitimized and addressed, and I feel like this was not. And like we haven't talked about what happened to Nancy, like on two ends, like this like slut shaming, and then this like people taking pictures of her and stuff, and she's like dating these people, like she's it's just very
I will
odd.
say I think that is like realistic in some ways.
Yeah, I think it is realistic, but they're like, where's the payoff for this? Like where does this go?
Yeah, I think you're right,
Is it just like that we love Jonathan now? Like what is it?
I think that's fair. Like I said, I think there's a fair amount of stuff on the show where it's like it's very believable. But then, like, you have to ask, like, what is the, like, what is it they're trying to say? What is, like, the narrative here doing? And I'm not a believer that, like, everything has to always say something.
Mm-hmm.
But
I feel like when you're doing something like that, though, you kind of have to.
Yeah. Or, you have to, like, tread carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, it matters a lot, like, who you are. Like, if you're, like, the Duffer Brothers, like, that, just, like, I don't even have to describe the Duffer Brothers. Like, they just sound like, a couple of Midwestern white dudes. And, like, there's nothing wrong. I'm a Midwestern white dude. There's nothing wrong with that. But, like, it also, like, limits your ability to, like, have that conversation. Especially if they aren't, like, making a really conscious effort to like bring in people who can have those conversations into the writer's room and really elevate their voices.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it didn't feel like they were doing that. And I haven't actually looked at the writer's room. I could be wrong. But it didn't seem to me like they were like going out of their way to elevate like the voices of women. It seemed to me like they were being like vaguely feminist dudes.
I think what Roger said in the chat summed it up really well, that they brought up these issues, they brought them to the table, but then they didn't want to do anything else with them.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they, you bring in the racial aspects, like with let's say Billy. Was like, no, don't hang out with him. He's bad. But it leaves that little bit of doubt.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
like, oh no, he just doesn't like him. And so like it's kind of like trying to have the cake and eat it too, where they bring up issues but then leave them be.
Yeah.
And then the whole argument, like also like the Duffer Brothers are 2 white guys. Should they even be bringing this up? Even the 4 of us, we are 4 white people.
Yeah. And so we're not like sitting here like the bastions of diversity and representation by any means.
Yeah. Anything that we say about diversity and racial issues should be taken with a huge grain of salt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, like I said before, like I don't necessarily want the Duffer Brothers to be like the authorities on that, but I think that like with Nancy especially, and as I watch her, this becomes more and more the case. It feels like Nancy feels like a Joss Whedon heroine.
Yeah.
Like she's a badass and she knows how to shoot a gun and like kind of bad, like I'm so sorry, Roger. And kind of like bad womanly things happen to her that like only really happen to women, and then like it's like sad, but then it's kind of forgotten about, and she like shoots a gun again, that's a very like Joss Whedon approach to it. And this isn't that I don't love Buffy the Vampire Slayer or whatever, because I do. I know that a lot of people like find empowerment from that kind of character, but I feel like you need to have a better like idea of what you're doing here, and I just don't quite feel like they did.
Like then there's like the whole argument too, like we're bringing up these issues, like are the Duffer Brothers or are Josh Whedon the ones to? I mean, no, they shouldn't, but at the same time, that could also be construed as a way to never talk about racial or sexual issues.
No, you're right. And like my opinion is that this can depend on medium, but like in television and especially in television and also in movies to some extent, but especially in television, like it's not the product of like 1 or 2 people. Like you have like television
it's a system.
Has a writer's room. They have a whole like sort of like dugout full of directors they bring in to do an episode at a time. Like I don't like, especially in that sort of system, I don't think it's that challenging to have a pretty diverse group of people. Now, I think that, for instance, like a novel is typically like one person writes it. You know what I mean? Like you don't really like put together a room to write a novel unless it's like, the latest, like, I don't know, who is like the author. He probably is doing that now. I don't even know. But,
they did. Those like books that are published all the time, like the airport books, like those. Danielle Steele, I think.
Yeah, those might have a writer's room for all I know. But like most novels are like the product of like one person, and they're like, and I think that obviously there are issues with diversity in publishing, but overall, like I think that like novels have somewhat diverse voices, or at least you can always find. Like it's not hard to find someone of every different sort of identity group you can think of who's put out a book.
Especially with the ease of self-publishing now.
Yeah. But with, and that's not to say there aren't problems in publishing, like there absolutely are. But still, like a novel is like a one-person sort of thing. So they're like, you can't, you like the one person just does their best, and you achieve diversity through like lots of different authors creating their own things. But like television, especially, and movies to a lesser extent, like are kind of done by committee, and just built into like you have like in television you have the like the showrunners, you have like the writer's room, you have like the producers, you have the directors, you have the cinematographers, you have all these different people with some input into what the final thing looks like. And I feel like it's not that hard to get some diversity there.
Yeah, and I feel like still, though, authors have a responsibility to support people who like
Yeah.
are not like every single author. Like, you know, they have the responsibility to read and like tweet about and stuff like that, like books written by women
Yeah,
and
agreed,
books written by queer people, people of color and stuff like that. And I think that like that's what every like content creator of privilege has that responsibility to do. Like you need to make sure that the content that you put out is like, if not authentic, like well researched, you know? And like I think that we had a conversation, Tom, I think like last week about like even like writing reviews, like you're part of like this media system, and like does that mean like you never watch a Harvey Weinstein movie again? Like what does that mean, and what is your ethical responsibility of being a content creator, even if it is like on a smaller scale and just like on the internet?
Yeah. I'm kind of looking at like the people involved with Stranger Things, like the executive producers, which executive producer can mean a lot of things. Looks to me like it's it's a bunch of dudes and a woman. I'm looking to see if I can find like the writers. Written by the Duffer Brothers. Season 1, episode 3 was written by a woman. So, yeah, there's women in here.
Okay. That's good.
Not like a ton. I mean,
still
it's like
dude.
About half the episodes are just the Duffer Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
There are women involved. Yeah. There's like episodes where like women are credited as the primary writers. And my understanding is that with shows, like the people they credit as primary writer are not necessarily like everyone pitches in for all of it. So
right. But I think that especially in horror, we have a tendency to kind of like forget the women and forget all these other people. Like in the original Halloween, who does ever remember? John Carpenter. Who do people always forget? Deborah Hill. And she also wrote Clue, which is another amazing movie.
Fair.
So and you know, like, not to say that John Carpenter is bad or didn't do anything, but we like history in general in a lot of areas has a tendency to forget anyone who's not like a white dude.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, agreed.
Like the concept of like American Psycho, one of the more well put together, was made by a woman named Mary Herron. How many times do you hear her compared to like Christian Bale for American Psycho,
like
or John
never.
Carpenter?
Yeah. Like never.
Right.
Directorial.
Mm-hmm.
All right, is your art done, Nick?
It's my art.
This is your art.
I can't think of anything else to do short of like putting mustaches on everybody, including the Mind Flayer. So I'm gonna say that it's done.
All right.
Nice.
I think we should probably call it a day here.
Yeah. It's done a little later.
No, I think that was.
This art is done. We've had a good
discussion.
discussion.
Thank you, everyone who watched.
Thanks for tuning in.
I'm sorry. We collectively apologize to Roger.
Yeah.
We love you, Roger.
I did bring it up. I should have followed up, but I did bring it up.
And Nick, is this picture going to go online where people could, download it? And I don't know, what do people do with pictures? Print them out?
Make it your desktop background.
Is it high enough resolution?
Or if you want.
Don't credit it
probably
anywhere.
Yeah, just
Cover
repin
up
the shit on Pinterest
with,
all fucking day.
Yeah. We have a lot of our stuff on Pinterest, actually.
It's pretty big.
I get stuff that comes up in our news feed where, like, sometimes, like, Nick's watermark is, like, covered up by, like, iPhone or something.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah. It always makes me laugh, though. But yeah, you can find, if you search, Nick Arasiva on or Project Derailed, even you can find our art like on Pinterest and on Google, on our website.
So as soon as we complete the stream, I'll be posting this through the Project Derailed Twitter. So
yeah. So everyone should retweet it.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.